recording. Thank you. Welcome everybody to the May 2021 meeting of CB1's Land Use, Zoning, and Economic Development Committee. I'm Patrick Cannell, chair of the committee. As I just said, we've got a pretty big agenda tonight. I do expect it'll be a bit of a long night, but just to set the table in a few ground rules, we don't want to be here till 9 or 10 o'clock. So while we have two really big applications and potential resolutions right in the middle, we want to, as well as another resolution on the planning together item, we want to make sure that we're making good use of our time. So I'm going to ask folks, when you're asking your questions, to keep them succinct. And we're going to, at some point, I imagine, have to cut off discussion on any one given topic to move on to the next. So don't take it as me being impatient. I'm just trying to keep an eye on the clock and respect everybody's time. So with that, we have the folks who are presenting on 5 World Trade with us.
Patrick,
good evening, everyone.
Still filtering in. I just want to check in to make sure if you have everybody. I just got a message that Holly is having trouble joining.
Yes, Holly's having. Yes, good evening, everyone. I'm on, but Holly's having trouble joining, and we need her for the beginning part of the presentation. So if we can just afford her another minute or so, I'm going to go ahead and share the slides for the presentation, and hopefully Holly should be joining shortly.
I can see Dara on as well. Hi, Dara.
Is everyone able to view my screen?
I can see it.
Okay, great. I'll just leave this up and again afford Holly another minute or so to join because she is needed for the beginning part of the presentation. Again, everyone, I apologize for the delay. We'll afford Holly another minute or so, and if not, I'll get started on the presentation. We'll reshape the structure of our slides, and Holly will join shortly.
I just want to make sure you can hear me if I need to speak. I just put headphones in. Can you hear me, Diana?
We can hear you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Diana, I've sent Holly the meeting code information as well, so she's going to try to join from another device as per your recommendation.
Okay, great.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Toby, is there a way you can just sort of introduce who's going to be speaking and give us a little outline of the presentation?
Sure, sure. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Toby Jayasimi, and I serve as the project director for ESD for World Trade Center Site 5. We'll be joined tonight by Holly Light, who's our EVP for Real Estate and Public-Private Partnerships. We're also joined with not necessarily a direct speaking role, but as part of the project team. Our co-public sponsors on this effort is the Port Authority. We have Matt Pedersen. We also have Michael Lavery on the line as well. I believe we also have Jolene Yates from the Port Authority on. And then from the development team, representing the joint venture, we also have Maria Mathley and Dara Quaylen on as well. And for tonight, for our agenda, what we're going to do is we're going to run through some of the background on the site, give folks some history, speak to the RFP and the process and how we got here. We'll speak to the highest scoring bid and proposal for the RFP, go into some details about the programming for the site, and then we'll speak to the CAC, which is the Community Advisory Committee that has been created specifically for this project. Talk about timeline in terms of where we are, what the next steps will be, and then we'll transition into opening up the floor for questions and hope to have a good dialogue and conversation with folks. So that is our current plan. Really excited, and thank you for the opportunity to be before you tonight.
And I want to point out, totally, that's great. Obviously, there's a lot of information that's going to get revealed to folks tonight, and there'll be a lot of questions. Just want to remind everyone, this is the beginning of a conversation. This isn't an application. This isn't something we need to decide on tonight or weigh in on tonight. So it's an opportunity to start asking questions, but we've got a lot of ground to cover, but it doesn't have to all come together tonight.
Okay, great. With that being said, Patrick, why don't I go ahead and get started? We'll afford Holly time to continue with attempting to sign on. And then if there are questions that come up that I may not be able to answer because I don't have as much history and insight on some aspects on the project, then I'll make note of it and we'll be sure to follow up accordingly. Is that okay? All right, great.
Sounds great. Thanks.
All right, I'm going to jump right into it. So like I mentioned earlier, this is what our general overview of tonight's presentation will be. And rather than reading through it again, I'm just going to jump right in. So pretty sure a lot of folks on tonight's meeting are familiar with the site. It is, just giving some context, LMDC, which is the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation, is a subsidiary of Empire State Development, which was created specifically for the improvement and betterment and structure of Lower Manhattan. Use HUD, which is the Housing and Urban Development Federal Corporation's Community Development Block Grant, CDBG funds to acquire, remediate, and clear Site 5, which is the former Deutsche Bank building. In 2004, the World Trade Center General Project Plan contemplated, specifically for Site 5, the idea of there being either commercial and or hotel use for the site. In February 2006, there was an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, that was established between LMDC, the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation, and the Port Authority, which swapped Site 5, which is LMDC owned, for the Memorial and Museum sites, the Performing Arts Center site, which was Port owned. In 2019, there was an MOU between LMDC and Port Authority to jointly issue an RFP for commercial or residential development at the site. This ability to allow for that to happen would require modifications to the World Trade Center General Project Plan, which only currently, as I mentioned, affords for commercial use, but with consideration for residential in the RFP. In June 2019, the RFP was released, and the parameters for the RFP included, more importantly, up to 1.345 million zoning square feet per the GPP, commercial or mixed-use development, and a height limit, which is again per the GPP. In 2019, there were a total of 5 proposals that were received. And then those proposals were scored by an interagency committee. Again, this is a joint partnership with the LMDC and the Port Authority. And these were the key selection criteria that we used in weighing and scoring the proposals. So, of course, the financial strength of the proposal at 50%, because we wanted to make sure that we looked at the competitiveness of the proposed sales price or the commercial ground rent offer, the financial feasibility of the project, Wanted to look also at project program design and community benefits, so how it is that the RFPs looked at the proposed uses, creative ideas in terms of the project design. Sustainability was also a key part, and also benefits to the surrounding communities, right, including economic impact, job creation, but also just looking at the role that this development will have as part of the entire area. Again, at 20%, there was the ability to look at the respondent experience and execution. Again, experience leading to financial capability, qualifications, past experience, the expediency of the proposed construction commencement and completion, again, being able to initiate, being able to execute and bring their vision in their RFP into reality. And of course, there was also the diversity practices, so looking at the ability for the respondents to meet some of the key elements in the diversity practices and MWBE requirements for the state. Moving on to the next slide. So the highest scoring proposal was a joint venture with 4 leads, Silverstein Properties, Brookfield Properties, Omni New York, and the Bar Development. Each structure, each entity brings a unique set of experiences and expertise to the project. Silverstein, again, having developed and owned and managed over 40 million square feet, extensive experience on the World Trade Center campus, having developed some of the other office towers. Brookfield Properties comes in, again, with billions of dollars in assets under management. They've developed an extensive amount of real estate across the world, and also have a number of real estate under active planning and construction right now. Omni is especially important to the development of this project because it's an exclusively affordable housing provider, over 17,000 plus affordable units acquired, developed, and or owned. The Bar Development is also equally important. There's 1,000 plus apartments right now in their development pipeline. The Bar has a really unique track record of working with both city and state agencies as well in terms of development, and well over $1 billion in transaction value. So this is the joint venture. This is the development team that will be working on World Trade Center Site 5. Now going to transition into talking more about the proposed programming. As I mentioned earlier, we're looking at 1.56 million gross square feet of development, approximately 80 stories. This will feature approximately 1.2 million gross square feet of residential retail development, which would equal approximately 1,300 or 1,325 total units, with 330 of those units being permanently affordable. That's 25% of the residential towers at permanent affordability at or below the 50% average AMI. Currently, according to federal regulations and guidelines, the 50% average AMI for a person of one is approximately $46,000, $47,000 in income, and for a family of 4, I believe it's approximately $59,000, $60,000 for a family of 4. The project will include approximately 190,000 gross square feet of office, approximately 12,000 gross square feet of community facility, 55,000 gross square feet of public amenity space, and approximately 7,000 gross square feet of retail. This project, again, would have a long-term lease, a 99-year lease, and as I noted earlier, this would require modification to the World Trade Center General Project Plan. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Wanted to note that for the key aspects of programming for this tower, there hasn't been a specific operator or vendor that has been selected, and definitely as part of our community engagement process, we'll be looking to getting ideas and feedback from the community about how to best maximize on the programming opportunities that's available for the site. Okay, speaking more into the affordable housing, like I mentioned, we're looking at 25% of the residential floor area will be affordable at or below an average of 50% area median income. This just goes into the more specification. The permanently affordable units will be established through a regulatory agreement with New York State Homes and Community Renewal, that's HCR. I wanted to note that there's a key part of the affordability aspect of this project is that it's, again, 25% of all of the units will be permanently affordable. When we look at the inclusionary housing for the city, that's usually at 20%, and we're looking at an average of about 60% AMI, whereas here we're looking at an average of 50% AMI. For the community facility, as part of their initial RFP response, the development team submitted letters of interest from a number of different nonprofit organizations. But as I noted earlier, we're looking to use our community engagement process to really get feedback, to hear from those in the community, those who would be directly impacted by this project, on what would be the best uses for the space that's available to us. In terms of job opportunities, we're noting that there will be approximately 5,400 direct construction jobs, 1,900 permanent jobs, 30% MWBE, which is minority women business-owned enterprises, and 6% SDVOB, which is SDVOB, service disabled veterans owned businesses, contracting goals. And of course, prevailing wage would be allowed for the construction jobs as well. Just looking closely at the proposed design, these two images, again, are just renderings. Initial renderings just show the relationship of the podium of the tower with the rest of the area. We're looking at interesting uses that look at the architectural heritage of the financial district, special attention to the masonry and the frames. The podium, again, provides for there to be a welcoming entryway for the potential office uses and also for the residential uses, and the relationship of the tower to both Greenwich Street and to Albany Street as well. In terms of next steps, so in February 2021, both the LMDC and Port Authority boards approved conditional designation of the development team that I just explained to you guys and introduced to you, gave you an overview of the programming. Where we are in terms of next steps, top of the list is community engagement. It's part of the reason why we're here, to introduce the project to you and to also take the opportunity to hear, to listen, and to process the feedback that's offered to us. The development team will work on advancing the programming and design of World Trade Center Site 5, and the ESD team, of course, led by our project staff and also with our consultant team, will be conducting an environmental analysis to take a closer look at the project. In the fall, we expect to go before the LMDC board to take initial action on the MGPP. Now, I'll take a minute. I understand that I've been using a lot of acronyms, and I'll try not to use too much alphabet soup here, but the MGPP would be the modifications to the general project plan. As noted earlier, we'd be allowing for there to be modifications to ensure that there is residential use that's permitted at the site. There'd also be, the LMDC board would also make determinations on the environmental review according to state and federal guidelines, and also start the disposition process for Site 5 to ESD. At that point, we'd initiate public hearings and public comment periods to be able to get feedback from the public about these actions. In winter, so by the end of this year into early 2022, we expect to go back before the LMDC board for them to consider the public comments, to take action on the MGPP and disposition of Site 5, and then for the ESD board to also take action on the acquisition of Site 5 and the long-term lease by the developer. In the spring and summer, by second quarter, third quarter 2022, we hope to have worked towards the final public approvals for the project. As I noted earlier, there's been a community advisory committee that's been established specifically for World Trade Center Site 5. CACs are something that ESD has established for a number of its different real estate projects. And so for the World Trade Center Site 5, here we see the representatives. We have elected officials, the Manhattan Borough President, the Congress member Gerald Nadler, Senator Brian Kavanaugh, Assemblymember Yuling Liu, Councilmember Margaret Chin. And then for community organizations, we have representatives from the Alliance for Downtown New York, the BMCC, Borough of Manhattan Community College, the FIDI Neighborhood Association, the Greek Orthodox Church, the Manhattan Chamber of Commerce, Manhattan Community Board 1, the Perman Performing Arts Center, and the 9/11 Memorial. And so, again, thank you all for affording me the opportunity to run through kind of some background and some programming on World Trade Center Site 5. I can stop sharing at this moment and take questions. I believe I've been joined by my project team. I believe Holly Like is on, so I'll stop now to afford her a few minutes to be able to give any remarks or clarify any statements that I may have made, and then we'll jump into the question and answer session.
Thanks, Toby.
Nothing to add. I think we can just turn it back over to you guys for questions.
Great. All right, so folks, the way this works is we go through committee members first and then to members of the public. I saw Justine had her hand up. Please use the raise hand feature. I was getting some feedback from somewhere. I'm not sure why. Diana, just to note that.
Yeah, just a reminder, if you're not speaking, please make sure to remute yourself. I think that's what's causing the echo. I think I've got it for now, but if everybody can help us with that. Oh, I'm still hearing
there it is.
Do your best to remute, and I'll do what I can on my end.
And I will do the same. So calling on Justine. Justine?
Okay, does that cause echoing? Or you're good? Okay. So I guess my question, first of all, thank you for this presentation and thank you for the comprehensive overview and also letting us know, Patrick, to you, saying this is not the end of the discussion, but the beginnings. That makes me feel positive. I'd like to just sort of comment about the affordable housing component. So I guess it was probably a big lift to get any kind of residential building built at World Trade Center 5. So thank you. And the second part of it, though, is with the affordable housing. I guess part of what I would be looking to see there is 100% affordable housing, not 25%. And then I'm glad to see that whatever is affordable is permanent, but not affordable housing at, I'm looking here to see, under the area medium income area, is that what the word is? Yeah, area medium income. So the levels would be, you're looking at very low income to low income for the band that you've talked about with the 25%. It's 31% to 80% of the area medium income is what seems like it's on the table now. What I'm going to suggest is that the rest of the building be opened up to moderate income and middle income. And if you really have to make ends meet by having some luxury or market value apartments, that should be limited to 10%. Because the other ask to the whole group is to say there should be a preferential housing offered to people who are 9/11 survivors and first responder survivors and the children of both groups. Because you've got a lot of people who are in Battery Park City now and who are in Lower Manhattan who lived through 9/11, who have stayed and rebuilt Lower Manhattan, who no longer can afford to stay here. Their children have grown up here and they no longer they cannot afford to live here because they're not quite low income, but they are within the range of maybe moderate income to middle income. And I don't understand why that kind of middle income, moderate income age group is always, or not age group, income group tends to be like squeezed out. And so I guess that would be my ask and my consideration is number one is to consider all levels with the 25% being for the low and very low income that you've already set aside. But I'm talking about the other 75%. And I thank you for letting me speak and I thank you for this presentation.
Thanks, Justine.
I'm
Toby
going to find mute. Sorry.
Toby and Holly, if you can, I'm just noting we have 10 other hands up at this point. So if we can just keep the answers succinct as well. And again, reminder for folks that we'll keep the questions succinct too. Thank you, Justine.
So you want me to jump into a little of the history there?
Yes, please.
So, Justine, thank you for your comment, and I'm sure, you know, if this was a blank slate, we would all love for this to be 100% affordable. The first or second slide that Toby showed went to the history of the site, and as you may recall, as someone who's been down there, this site really was originally to be swapped with the Port Authority because they gave LMDC the central sites for the memorial and for the museum. And so, you know, under the agreement that was made, they have as a right ability to develop an office building here. And so their mandate is different than LMDC's, as you know. And so they need the value from this to serve their Port Authority mission. That was always the agreement we made when we did the land swap. So because we do have to give them the commercial value of the building, you know, we really, really pushed it to get to the affordability levels that we have. It is not a blank slate. We chose the priority to be the memorial and the museum for the public uses here. And so that is a real constraint on the site that you know, we have to be cognizant of. Your question about the affordability levels, this is a range, you know, up to nothing can be higher than 80% of area median income. The range is in a typical mandatory inclusionary project, it would be an average of 60% of area median income instead of 50%. The city actually chose to bring that down to 50 based on what they identified as the greatest need in the community. So they actually did the analysis to show that those slightly lower bands were needed here. Now, I hear you on middle income. That is a tougher one to serve, but the lowering to the 50% was, and up to 80 was based on the city's assessment of need. Sorry, that was probably longer, Patrick.
No, that's fine. And it covers two important points. And I want to point out, as folks are asking questions, we do try to make an effort not to repeat the same thing if somebody else has already asked it. So we've covered 100% affordability. We've covered AMI bands. So if you have your hand up and that was your question, if you don't have another question, I'd ask that you take your hand down. But next we're going to go, so this is the order. We're going to go to Michael Kramer, then Jill Goodkind, then Colin Mahoney, then Paul Goldstein.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. I'm wondering how many public meetings will be required as part of the process to change the general project plan of the World Trade Center? And can you delineate this process and all other approvals, especially that require public meetings?
Toby, do you want to take that, or you want me to?
Sure. Thank you for your question, Michael. Off the top of my head, I can't give you a set specific number of public meetings, but what I would note is that each action that is taken that is related to the MGPP, one, all of our board meetings do have the ability for members of the public to make comment. So all of our board meetings do have that option available to them. So you're welcome to be able to give public comment to the items that go before the board. And then as we consider the modifications, there's going to be not only the opportunity to make comment during established public hearings and meetings, but then there's also going to be a public comment period. And that public comment period will be well advertised and will be distributed to the community, to elected officials. We'll find other ways to broadcast that information as well, so that folks know that they have this opportunity to give feedback, to give their perspective on the items that we'd be considering for the modifications.
And is there a timetable?
The first action that would go before the LMDC board would be this fall. I don't have the specific date or the details of that meeting yet, but we'll be sure to share it with the community board accordingly. But expect that in the fall we'll commence that action, and then there'll be subsequent meetings following that.
Great, thanks, Michael. Jill, Colin, then Paul, please.
Hi, Jill Goodkind here, and I just want to start by saying my late husband, Tom, this particular building was his passion project to make this affordable housing. I'll just say I agree with everything Justine said, and that the answers we received were not satisfactory. So specifically, my two questions are, one, the CAC meeting, when is that? And I'd like for members of the public who represent this community to be able to attend that. And the list of community organizations that you had, out of that list, only one, being the community board, represented the residents of this community. And then my second question is, in the RFP, I have a question about the weighting, specifically about the financial aspect of that weighting being 50% of your decision on who was going to be the developer. That, by doing that, it strikes me, taken out a lot of people who may have had more affordable housing as their central need. So having 50% of your decision on who got the RFP based on financial requirements to me seems odd and not fair, and I'd like more information on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill.
I can speak to the CAC meetings and note that the meetings were structured to allow for us to meet with the established CAC members, so they are not open to the public. But as part of our community engagement and public engagement process, our only avenue for outreach will not be just the CAC, right? We welcome the opportunity to be able to, as we're doing tonight, come before the community board and come before other community organizations that will be directly impacted by this project and in the neighborhood. And so, Jill, thank you for your feedback. What I would suggest is if you have other community organizations that are specifically reflective of the needs of the residents in the community that you can recommend to us, that you think should be part of our public engagement process, then I'd love to get that information from you. We can channel it through Diana, through Patrick, or you can reach out to me directly with some thoughts on that.
That would be to join the CAC?
No, it wouldn't be to join the CAC, but it would be for us to have the opportunity to be able to have conversations about the project, the programming and design for the project as well. And so the CAC won't serve as our only avenue for public engagement, but we're welcome to meeting with other community organizations.
May I just quickly ask who determined the members of the CAC?
The list was specified by the public sponsors for the project, which is the ESD and the Port Authority.
Okay, so the community groups had no input from the community. It was the EDC and the and who else?
Yeah, the CAC the CAC was established by ESD and the Port Authority.
Okay, thank you.
And LMDC, I would add as well.
And LMDC.
And obviously all the elected, every local elected official at the city, state, and federal level is automatically invited.
Okay. And then the second question was about the financial weighting in terms of selecting the RFP.
Right. I would just defer to my last answer, which is that this site is, as of right, the port's site to sell. And so the agreement to do residential rather than make it an as of right additional office building requires that the port be compensated for that. So this was always part of the understanding when the community and the LMDC supported putting a significant memorial in the center of the site on Port Authority property. The port did not have to abandon the footprints of the World Trade Center, and they did that by swapping it for this site.
I see. So part of that was that whoever you selected to develop that site, the RFP requirements included that 50% weighting.
It was 50% because we have to compensate the port for giving us the footprint of the Trade Center for the memorial. Those were Port Authority, that is Port Authority or was Port Authority owned land. And so this site was swapped for that. So they need to be, compensated for the fact that the public got the memorial site and the museum site in exchange.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jill. Colin, then Paul, then I think we're ready to go to the public.
I'll be very brief. What steps are you taking to mitigate climate or environmental impact with the construction? And the second quick question, and I'll go on mute, is there a way you can explore to find or to prioritize small business for the commercial space in the building?
With regards to the environmental, the climate impacts, there's a full environmental review that will be done as part of the process for this project. And so if you recall earlier when I spoke to the preliminary timeline, one of the items that will happen this fall third quarter or fourth quarter would be that we'd come before the LMDC board with regard to the determination for the environmental analysis, according to both state, which is SECRA, and also federal, which is NEPA regulations for the project. So that will include, an analysis with regards to air quality, traffic impacts, quality of life impacts, potential construction impacts as well. So there will be a full analysis that's being done by ESD's environmental review team and also our consultant team as well. And so, again, all of that, those informations and that findings would be, of course, made public, and there will be an opportunity for there to be public comments on that as well.
And sorry, just to follow up on that really quickly, I would just more of a comment, and everyone in this community has heard me say this 100 times with new construction. I would just hope that I would urge you to find a way to make the building a passive building or even a carbon negative building if at all possible. There's lots of examples globally with countries and cities exploring ways to achieve climate negative status. And the second question was, if there's any, I know this is a stretch, but if there's any way to prioritize small business for those commercial spaces. I know small business has taken a pretty large hit over the last year or so, and I personally would love to see small businesses prioritize over large global chains. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Colin. That's a great comment that we'll definitely take back. Thank you.
Great. So moving on to Paul, and then I do see Bob Schneck and Alice that put their hands up as well. So we're going to go Paul, Bob, Alice, and then we are going to the public.
Okay, thank you. I also want to talk just a bit about the Community Advisory Committee and their role versus the role of the Community Board in this ongoing process. I mean, in the development of the Trade Center in the past, I think it has been the Community Board that has been the primary voice of the community in these sessions, and by creating this Community Advisory Committee, you're basically watering down the input and the ability of the Community Board to have a primary voice on behalf of the community. So why did you create this Community Advisory Committee? And don't you think that will diminish the role of the Community Board? What kind of role do you envision for the Community Board moving forward?
Can I give you a break and answer that, or you want to keep going? So the reason we create community advisories is part of the UDC Act. And UDC Act allows us that opportunity to get extra input in a very candid space, and where we can appoint people, invite people, and just have a very open, candid conversation. What that really does is allows us to have the community advisory plus the community board. Just as we're here tonight in this, I believe Brian said at the beginning, this is the beginning. And so we have an opportunity to come before the community board, the committees, work with the district manager, work with the chair throughout the entire process. Also, we shouldn't forget there are 3 community board members on the Community Advisory Committee. So it's really, think of it this way, it's a twofer. It's not diluting, watering down. It's an opportunity for us to come before you, the public, and get feedback there. Then there's an opportunity for us to have candid conversation as well.
Thanks. So that was Marion Phillips, who's with ESD. I think your title Senior Vice President of Communications, right?
Community Relations, yes.
Great. Marion, thanks for jumping in and helping to clarify that.
I just wanted to give Toby a break. That was it.
Sure. Okay, so Bob and then Alice.
Okay, I just wanted to offer what I'll call a reality check here. And that is that we are on the outset of a COVID recovery in downtown. And this is, or strikes me as, really an opportunity to rebuild better what's downtown, because I see lots of commercial devastation down here, and many of my neighbors still haven't returned. And I found out that many of the large businesses I know aren't going to return till next year. So what do we really need downtown? Firstly, we don't need overbuilt luxury housing. We don't need hotels, and we have less need than ever of additional commercial space. Even the it's going to take a while to get all of the World Trade Center buildings kind of filled up, even before we build World Trade Center 2. So that need isn't what we have. But what are the priorities? The priorities are affordable housing, especially middle income. We need infrastructure, especially schools and transportation. And we really need a genuine small business recovery downtown, because we're in trouble. Some of the opportunities I think that we have is to develop performing arts. And one of the ideas, we're going to have a remarkable performing arts center. One of the ideas that Tom Goodkind had was to have artist housing downtown. And in particular, he often thought of West Beth as a kind of model for that. And I often wondered whether World Trade 5 would be an opportunity for that. Following on to Colin's suggestion, this really has to fit local law 97 and really be a highly ecological building. And it's an opportunity for very appropriate design, very appropriate leadership, net zero design here. Finally, I think that we really need to understand what community benefits are going to be had for the downtown community coming out of this project. And also, I think that the community board should be given financials of how much money is being transferred here and how much profitability there are to the developers, and how the community can benefit from all that. So that's my offer of a reality check.
Thanks, Bob. Does anyone from the presenting team wish to respond or address any of those comments?
No, Bob, thank you for that. Those were all well received, and we'll definitely circle back with the team.
Okay. Alice, you're going to be next. Before we do, I just want to point out some folks have submitted their comments in writing, specifically pointing to Mariama, who points out that she's joined in Justine's comments. Those were submitted in writing. And I know at least one member of the public also submitted a list of questions in writing. That's a great way to handle some very specific questions or a longer list of questions. If you're able to get those by email to the community board, we promise to get them to the Site 5 team and get back to you with written responses to those. With that, Alice?
Thanks, Patrick, and thank you to the presenters. Just a few questions on the public space aspect of this. So could you just review that you have 12,000 square feet of community space and 55,000 square feet of what you're calling public amenities? Could you just define that a little bit? I know it's very schematic at this point, but could you just provide a little more insight as to what that is? And then in that vein, how much, if any, public space will there be at the ground level? Is there any outdoor public space that's part of this program?
So you want to have Maria or Dara maybe speak to them?
Sure.
Hi, Alice. I'd be happy to talk about that. So there is between 11 and 12,000 square feet of community space, and we welcome any ideas and suggestions for the use of that space. When we submitted our initial proposal to ESD and the Port Authority, we got some letters from local organizations who we thought might be a good fit, but I think part of this process is to determine what the community really needs and wants for that space. Right now it's envisioned on the second floor of the building with its own entrance. So, you know, because of the very small or smaller footprint of Site 5, there isn't a plan for outdoor space. You know, everything will be within the building envelope. So if anyone does have ideas for organizations or for uses of that space, we'd be absolutely open to it. So just let us know.
Thanks so much, Dara. And then the 55,000 square feet of public amenity, what was that? Or did I read that wrong?
I'm wondering if Maria is able to talk about that particular piece of space. Otherwise, we'll get back to you on that. No, we'll get back to you on that one.
That would be
Okay.
great.
I mean, our understanding was that that was a proposal for sort of a fitness gym center that would be open to the public for joining as well as, the residents, not just for residents.
I'm sorry, I
That's-
couldn't
I
make that
believe
out.
that-
What did you say? I'm sorry, could you repeat it?
Sure. I believe in the proposal, and if I'm wrong about this, that the understanding was that that would be sort of a fitness center, gym space that would be not just for residents, but also open to the public to join.
Yeah. Health and wellness.
Something that one would have to pay for to join, or would that be free to the public?
No, it would be paid membership, but open to the public as well as the people who live in the building.
So essentially, very little, it sounds like. I guess the last point I want to make, and I really appreciate all the points that Paul, particularly Goldstein, was making on the CAC. In the interest of the open and candid, which are two great words there, is there some way that we could assure that the public could attend without being able to speak, perhaps, but to at least be able to attend, like many board meetings that certain organizations allow for the public to attend? They're not necessarily involved in them. Is there some reason why that couldn't be arranged so that they may not be on the CAC, but that they can listen? I think that would be very helpful to the community and frankly to this team that's working on this project.
One of the things am I being heard?
Yeah,
You're
Mary.
a little bit
Okay.
hard to hear.
One of the reasons we have the community advisory as a closed meeting, it really allows us to put ideas out there, to have conversations, go back and forth, where people don't put things out in the atmosphere and make it an issue when it's not an issue. It's a conversation. It's an idea. Trying to fine tune. And when we eventually are able to put a plan together, then it comes before the public, as Toby stated, in public hearings. It comes before our board. It comes before the community board. In fact, I believe the chair had asked us would we be willing to do a community meeting. And that's something we're thinking about as well, because that's when we are this allows us to have the back and forth candidly and in private and publicly with the community board. And we have found that to be the best way to really fine tune the project.
Well, with all due respect, I couldn't disagree more. I think it's essential that the public be allowed to be part of all community meetings on these issues. I understand that the conversation needs to be limited, but I do not believe that people should be limited from these meetings. And I think it's something that I would really ask that we review again and allow for public to attend so that they can keep up, or if not, that these meetings are recorded and that one could listen to them after the meeting so that the notes and what is said is in fact recorded and available to the public. And Patrick, I would offer that up as a resolution if this isn't something that that we could resolve obviously
today. I think the best thing for us is to always keep these meetings closed so that we can have these conversations without just a simple dialogue getting out in the public. That was never designed to be an idea or anything other than, hey, what do you think about X, Y, or Z? And then the public takes that and makes it something that it never was intended. So I appreciate your comment. But we're going to continue keeping community advisories closed at this time.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you all.
Okay, Richard Corman, I see you have your hand up. Richard, if you're able to unmute, otherwise we'll move on.
I think I have it now. Is that right?
There we go. There we go.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. Certainly, it's good to hear that we have an opportunity and some time in front of us to weigh in on this incredibly important and monumental project for Lower Manhattan. I want to follow up a bit on the affordable housing comments that you heard earlier from Justine. Not to repeat them, simply to say, first of all, that I support that concept entirely. At least the idea of a structure that generates far more affordable housing than we have. What I wanted to know is, from what I heard you say, that to me, situation with the Port Authority is not fully clear. What's been negotiated, how final those negotiations are, whether there's an opportunity to reopen those negotiations. And so my question to you is, what is the status of that? Should the public and elected officials decide that in fact they want to change this deal and create affordable housing at a much greater scale than is already in the project, how can that be done? And when can that be done? And what would it take to make that happen?
Well, the agreement for swapping the land is clearly water under the bridge. I mean, that was an agreement that was made in 2006, and I don't think we can undo having the memorial and the museum on their land. So that is a deal that was made quite a while ago, because really unanimously the priority of the community at the time and the LMDC was to have a memorial on the footprint of the Trade Center, and that was owned by the Port Authority. So that agreement that we would swap the land stems back to 2006. The more recent agreement was that the Port Authority has the as-of-right ability to develop an office building of the same size and density as what this building is. The agreement we made was to be more open-ended with the use. We had heard a fair amount from the community that there was enough office space and that there was an interest in seeing some residential. And so the Port Authority agreed to kind of broaden that, so long as they would still be the beneficiary of whatever lease or sale would occur, because that was the agreement from 2006. We worked hard mutually to have a significant affordable component of that. But the Port Authority does have rights to this land to sell for their mission, which is different than LMDC's mission. So that's kind of the history of how we got to this place. And it really stems from the memorial and the museum and the Performing Arts Center being on what was Port Authority owned land.
Okay. Follow up, if I may. It sounds to me that it's a question of money. Is it a question of money? And could the Port Authority be compensated in such a way that in fact the use structure that's been agreed to can be changed?
Sure, how we answer that, there's where that funding would come from to compensate them for the value of that land. And this is an agreement from 2006. They have rights to this land. We do not. This is their land by the agreement to swap the land. So I'm not sure what is going to pay for that value of the land if there's another entity that wants to purchase that land from them. They have, I think there's no. This is their land. They have every right to go build an office building on this land at this point. That is as of right. We don't have to go through a modification of the general project plan for them to build an office. They could do it tomorrow. The project plan is to enable residential with 25% affordable. Otherwise, we walk away and they build an office building when the market is there to build an office building.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Michael Francoeur has his hand up, and then we really need to move on to the members of the public. I see at least 7 or so hands up. Michael, are you able to unmute?
Yes, I am. Thanks, Patrick. And I'll try to be brief.
Thank you.
Because primarily I do just want to echo the very thoughtful comments and questions by other members of the committee. Given that this is, the rare kind of publicly owned, I do understand it's authority owned, but publicly owned plot of land in a densely zoned neighborhood, the opportunity I do want to thank the LMDC for pushing and getting residential, and I'm so glad to see that there's some affordable there, but I echo everyone's interest in bringing as much affordable as possible. To the comments about, you know, Port Authority's prerogative and interest in missions, is the Port Authority going to be a part of all of these public sessions and public comment periods? And just to I guess second Richard's line of questioning, is there a sense that this is as far as the Port Authority is willing to go in terms of affordable? Is there like some line in the sand as to how much money or money that the Port Authority wants return for this property?
To your first question, Michael, the Port Authority is actually represented here and will be a part of the community and public engagement process moving forward.
Okay. Thank you, members of the committee and public members of CB1. We're going to move on to the public, and in the order they're appearing on our screen is we're going to go Taylor Banning, Todd Fine, and then Victoria. There are several more behind them, and I'll announce them as we get through those three. So Taylor, you're first.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Taylor. I'm a lifelong resident of Battery Park City, and I am actually one of those children who were here on 9/11 and have lived here since. And I'm, as a young adult, trying to, while battling 9/11 related illnesses in myself and my family and my neighbors, trying to build a family here. And I'm kind of one of very few, because it's extremely hard to afford to live here. Are people like me who are my sister just turning 20 this year, the anniversary of 9/11, 20th anniversary of 9/11. And, you know, this is the deadline to sign up for the health fund. And I feel like a lot of these kids don't know about it. And my understanding is the LMDC was created after 9/11 and the aftermath as an opportunity and a means with which to disperse the funds, the government funds, to rebuild our community, something that we've been doing as community members. And so it is honestly very upsetting to me that Tower 5 is at all being considered to be luxury, especially when it's related to LMDC and some of its funding, and the Port Authority, which is city related to the city. So I hear that the Port Authority members are on. So my question is for Michael Levery, Derek Utter, Justin Burnback, Jolene Yeats, Matthew Peterson of the Port Authority on this call. Will you commit to making this building affordable, and far more affordable than the base minimum, which is this 25%, which isn't really going above and beyond for this community or for what's on the table here? So to you all, will you commit to making this building at least more affordable and ideally 100%? Thank you.
Thanks, Taylor. Who from the port would like to field that?
Hi, thank you for your feedback, Michael Avery. That's all I can say is, you know, we welcome your feedback. We can't commit to that at this time.
Okay. All right, so we're going to go Todd Fine, then Victoria, then Linda Roche.
Yes, hello. I'm Todd Fine. You can hear me?
We can.
Yes, I'm the president of the Washington Street Advocacy Group, and I sent a lot of questions, which I appreciate you saying could be completed in writing. I'd first just like to say that 2 years ago, the LMDC came before this community board, and said that if a residential bid won, it would have to legally be a sale. It would have to be a sale of the property, and CB1 would be involved in spending tens of millions, maybe $100 million in benefits to benefit Lower Manhattan. Now we're told that it will be a lease and there will be no money to benefit Lower Manhattan. And I'm surprised that Community Board 1 is not making a bigger deal about it. And the fact that it's a lease also contradicts a lot of these arguments about the return to the Port Authority, because it's now not a substantial gift. It's a murky lease with the structure we don't even know. So I don't think we should buy this argument that the Port Authority is insisting on this lease revenue in order for compensation. It doesn't quite make sense. My question is, what rights would the September 11th Memorial and the Performing Arts Center receive as part of the land transfers? Could they potentially sell their rights to other parties or put them up as loan collateral? And would they at any time in the now or in the future potentially be given access to air rights as part of those land transfers? Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. Site 5 team.
I think I'd want to get back to you on the specifics, Todd, about the air rights. But I think that they would have a fee interest in their sites, and in fact, that fee interest is basically being held in escrow until Site 5's disposition is completed. But they would have a fee interest, and they will own the land on which the memorial and the museum and Performing Arts Center would be.
So they could sell it legally.
I want to go back. I mean, there's use restrictions on them, so they can't just go sell it for a tower. There's use restrictions connected to those, but I want to make sure I go back and tap into our lawyers to get the exact language.
And would it remain under state zoning, or would it be city? Okay.
No, it's part of the World Trade Center general project plan.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, Todd. Moving on to Victoria, then Linda Roche, then Emily Hellstrom. And I'm sorry, Victoria, there's no last
Hi, everyone.
name.
You
Oh,
there?
great.
Yes, it's Victoria Hellstrom. So, look, thank you very much. I would like to remind everybody that those planes were aiming at our community, and we are all survivors of 9/11 and the rebuilding of Lower Manhattan after 9/11. I would agree with Richard Corman. All of this talk about the Port Authority, the notion is that they were given a commercial right. And I'd like to remind everyone, all of the money, $40 billion in total, that went to rebuilding Lower Manhattan after 9/11. That money went to Bank One at 42nd Street. It went to the New York Times. It went to Navy Yards. So the Port Authority had many of its members die on 9/11. And at minimum, I believe that there should be a quote unquote affordable unit for every single person that died on 9/11 at minimum. And I would also just like to say that I feel that it's very inappropriate that this is being decided during a pandemic. The public process and our right to participate, I feel, has been ignored, and many of us are very disappointed at what's going on. And we're friends with Ron Perlman. I would never speak ill of him or the Performing Arts Center. It's not about that. Terrorists took aim at our city, and these are our homes. And the notion that we have been discluded, it's just very wrong. So I'd like to, I appreciate what everyone is saying and doing. This is our city, and the federal government, I just looked up Port Authority, looks like certainly got a lot of bailout money. So the idea that this is Port Authority's land, on some level, it's our land. And this is look, if we don't do this right, the terrorists finally won. And the idea that this is being treated like a real estate deal or a land deal is wrong. And I'd like everybody to check their conscience and really think about what we're doing here. And we are a 9/11 family. We are 8 blocks away from ground zero. We had a president standing on the top of the heap saying, We hear you. And yet look at what in God's name is going on behind our backs. This is our community. And I hope that you all hear us. It's very important for all of us to take our community back. And Holly, with all due respect, it's not up to you, it's up to us. And where our electeds have gone wrong, we will go back and take them to task. We don't want this. We want to be involved. We want you to hear us. We want the Port Authority to hear us. And if we need to go to the President of the United States, this is wrong. These terrorists wanted this land, and you have got to stop rolling over for them. It is really just very disrespectful to the people that died on that day, the people that live in Lower Manhattan, and really, that's all I have to say. I'd really like you all to really consider what you're saying and how offensive it is to so many of us. This is our community, and this is our country, and the Port Authority, what they own, what they don't own. The community is unhappy about it. And I would also like to know why the families have not been included in this process. I find it to be very, very alarming.
All right, thanks, Victoria.
Thank you.
Got it. We'll move on to, unless anybody has from the Site 5 team has any specific response. Linda Roche, Emily Hellstrom, then Esther Riegelson, and Joshua Morris, and Pat Gray.
Taking my, well, first remark and then a question. I have lived in this neighborhood for 43 years. I am a survivor of 9/11, being at 7 World Trade Center that morning. And I also find it very disingenuous that the community has not been involved, nor has more affordable housing been eked out of this behemoth building that's going to be built. You know, the people of this community who actually can't afford to live here anymore, but yet it's their home, should be allowed to have a place to live out their lives. But my question is, have you thought of, this community has been involved since 9/11 in many, many projects, and many of the projects include charrettes. Have you thought about charrettes that would include the community, not the Downtown Alliance or the whatever other, you know, community amenities? I'm talking about the people of this community. And I think it would be very worth your while to do that. So hopefully you'll take that suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We'll definitely work on further engagement with the community board, community organizations, and also consider hosting larger public meetings as well.
Thanks, Linda. Emily Hellstrom, Esther, and then Joshua Morris.
Thank you so much for allowing me to speak, and thank you to Community Board 1, who continues to fight so hard for the things that our community needs and wants. I'm just looking right now at a Real Deal article for May 7th. The headline is "FIDI Condo Glut is Through the Roof." And a couple of paragraphs down, it says not only is the condo glut through the roof, but with available office space in Lower Manhattan at a 20-year high, and only 16% of office employees back at work as of April. Bloomberg reported buyers are not basing purchases on proximity to work. So I guess I would say that it definitely feels like if somebody was, as of right, going to build office space, that they got a really good deal to be allowed to build condos, but not that great a deal because, of course, luxury condos are in an extreme glut right now. I think that what the community really feels is though when we have things like private authorities or authorities that are really supposed to be public, but they somehow are able to not be a part of the community process, like subject to open meeting laws and have the community directly involved. That's when either the community gets distrustful, and maybe it's not for the right reasons, but the fact is that we must have open meeting laws so that we don't lose faith in our government and our public process. So I would suggest first open meeting, and then also we really must consider the fact that this is public land, and I understand that the Port Authority does want to have, you know, compensation, and they have goals. But the fact is that the museum and the memorial are, you know, visited by literally hundreds of thousands of people pre-pandemic. The city is, you know, is really making money off of a tragedy that we all must remember, but that money should not be seen as something that cannot go back into affordable housing. We have said that the stated goals are both federally, state, and in a city level for affordable housing. We must keep our eye on that ball. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Emily. Just a quick clarifying point for the Site 5 team. This will be rental and not condo, correct? Okay.
That's correct. It's rental.
Yes. Make sure I heard about condos in there. Okay, let's go to Esther, then Joshua, then Pat Gray, please.
How do I unmute? Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Thank you. I've lived in this community for about 40 years, and after 9/11, I attended LMDC meetings about the demolition of the Deutsche Bank. And guess what? You all did not listen to the community. The community was there. We told you how to take apart that building carefully, and 2 firefighters died in the process. And I think, once again, we're not being listened to. I think if you listen to everyone that's spoken here tonight, you can see there are things that we want, and sadly, I think we're not going to get. We want as close to 100% of affordable and low-income housing as possible. When you have low-income housing, you will get more diversity in this neighborhood. We need that. We need small businesses supported. We need our environmental concerns met in the building of this huge structure. And because you're not listening to us, and you're not going to have us on your community advisory committee either, you're just going to give us lip service and say, oh, look at all these comments, and throw them away. And I think that's just, I find it very insulting, and I don't see any recourse for the community to be really, truly be listened to. And we need to change that. And I really appeal to the community board to be active in this and to jump on it and do something about it, because I just think it's going to be business as usual, and I'm sorry to see that. Thank you.
Thanks, Esther. I'm going to move to Joshua Morris, Pat Gray, then Adrian Sosin, then Tiffany Winbush, and then we have to move on to the next topic.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to speak my thoughts on Site 5. With high availability in office spaces in Manhattan, not to mention Tower 2 lack of an anchor tenant, why not allocate 190,000 square feet of office space to more feasible use, such as a school, to diversify the World Trade Center? And for my second question, which is a very small detail, the World Trade Center towers have a unique transparent facade that all blends in together. Tower 5 light-colored mullions facade stands out from the rest of the tower's facades at the World Trade Center. If I had no knowledge of the World Trade Center and stood in Liberty Park and not knowing Tower 5 is a part of World Trade Center complex, why not have a complete transparent facade to blend in with the rest of the towers at the World Trade Center? Thank you.
Any quick response to that from the team? Holly looks like she's trying to unmute.
Yeah, I would just say quickly that the design is still preliminary. We did get some feedback that the masonry, the kind of connection to the southern part of the neighborhood, as opposed to just the Trade Center site, would call for some masonry elements, but I think the architecture team is still taking everything under advisement, so appreciate your comments on that.
Great, thanks. Let's go to Pat Gray, Adrian Sosin, then Tiffany Winbush.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Good, thank you. Thank you for having me on. First of all, I 100% agree with so many of the previous speakers from this area who have spoken in favor of 100% of the new building being for affordable housing at all different levels. And I have a couple of questions, and one of them is we've been told about this plan to bring this thing in. We haven't been told about what data was used to determine that this area needs to have luxury apartments, 1,000 new luxury apartments. I would be very curious to find out how that was selected. Number one, that's basically a question. Number two, my understanding is that this is a national monument. And if the answer is not to the previous question is not that, well, the bottom line is we have to because of money. If this is a national monument, shouldn't we get national figures involved in this? I mean, isn't it possible that the U.S. government could come up with a way to provide the kind of money that is being said we essentially owe to people? And number three, I like previous speakers, questioners, feel that CB1 has not been listened to prior either. And I'm specifically looking right now at something called Manhattan CB1 District Needs Statement. This is from FY16, however, it is still applicable. And it says, and a priority of CB1, it is a priority of CB1 to ensure that the existing rent stabilized and affordable units in the district are preserved and that development of new affordable housing units continues. We must ensure that people who teach our children, patrol our streets, and fight our fires can afford to live in the neighborhoods they serve. We therefore urge the city to build more affordable housing downtown, as well as to do everything possible to preserve existing units. It doesn't sound like anybody read this. And I guess my major question would be, what are the statistics that support putting in 1,000 units of luxury housing in our neighborhood?
Okay, Site 5 team, any response you want to make, or maybe you have some data that you can supply to Diana and we can put out to the community?
I mean, I would just respond that we put out the RFP that you heard about with the criteria, and we received responses that were both commercial and residential, and the residential that maximized up to 25% affordable was the preferred response rather than more office space here, which is what is as of right accepted right now could be built. But, you know, I think we did hear from the community that there was a desire for residential. And we will have over 300 affordable units in this project. So the ability, the rental housing, market housing will help pay for those residential units while still keeping our deal with the port in exchange for the memorial site and the museum site.
Great, thanks. All right, Adrienne Sosin, then Tiffany, and I see Tammy has her hand up as well.
Thank you for letting me speak. I want to echo some of the things that the community members and the members of the community board have said about the fact that we do want affordable apartments. This is public property. These are public, you are supposed to be carrying out the public charge. And we are unhappy with the idea that this space will be devoted to luxury apartments. It is not the right thing to do. I call on the community board to press for open meetings and open communication and no backroom deals. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Adrienne. Tiffany Wimbush.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thanks for giving me a time to speak. Well, I certainly echo everyone's thoughts about affordable housing, so I won't go into that. But one of the topics that I would like to discuss is the availability of community space. I know that is has been discussed in this particular instance, and we've seen in other cases where developers have offered community space, and unfortunately, it's not open and available to the community. It, you know, takes a reservation or certain, you know, times of the year that it's available. So whatever space that is allotted to be open for the community, I am really pushing that it is open and it is available as much as possible, and that, you know, families will be able to benefit from that. The larger neighborhood will be able to benefit from that. Because if this is a new development which is coming into the neighborhood, you know, we want to be able to integrate and be a part of it and enjoy whatever community space is available. So I would please ask that that is noted as it is being considered, what exactly that community space will look like and what the offerings will be. Thank you.
Noted. Thanks, Tiffany. All right, Tammy, you have your hand up. I'm going to get the last word because we are now almost an hour and a half into this, with 3 significant items left to go for tonight. Tammy?
So I think that actually illustrates my point really, really clearly for the team from ESD, Silverstein, Omni and all, and LMDC, that more public engagement is needed. If we're here for over an hour and there's still questions and conversation to be had, more than just feedback and questions that you need to reply, yes, charrettes. Yes, public engagement. Yes, everything that I can say, you know, is to be needed. I know that I did hear from several members on the community board already that have asked for recordings of CAC meetings or how things can be public. So I do think that you owe a responsibility to come back and let us know what possibilities of public engagement can be confirmed, whether it's from whatever method. I heard what you said and what Mike said about the CAC, but then you need to find a way to have an understanding, whether it's meeting notes or something. Okay, that's 1. 2, I'm really curious about the as of right. I have been here since pre-9/11 and worked in the towers. I don't remember the Deutsche Bank building being quite this tall. So I'd like to know, was the site granted any additional air rights at all from anywhere? And if so, how that may have worked and how that worked in with, quote unquote, making the Port Authority whole, and whether or not we will see the financials on those.
Hey, Tammy. This is the original height from you know, the spiral of the original plan. So we did not add additional square footage or height. Those portions, the only thing that was allowed to be flexible in the RFP was the use, but not the height or density.
And what? So who owns the air rights?
Who owns the air rights
for the other buildings that are
much
swap?
Yeah, Todd financed that earlier. You know, those are restricted to the uses that are there, but we'll get back with more particularity on kind of the legal regulations on those sites.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tammy. Just a quick clarifying point to what you just asked. I do think that the design, or the proposal at least right now, is taller than what 130 Liberty was before it was deconstructed. But Holly, I think when you said in the spiral, you're talking about the Daniel Libeskind master plan, correct?
Right.
Okay.
They're all, and I would include the memorial in this too. So the general project plan that was passed in 2002, and then I guess modified in 2000, set very specific heights and densities. And so this height and density goes back to that master plan that Libeskind did, and then that was sort of encapsulated in the general project plan. And the memorial could never be sold because that is in the general project plan as the memorial. So those are all legally regulated through the original World Trade Center general project plan. What this action would do would be to modify just the use for this one site, but nothing else would be affected.
Gotcha.
So,
and I respectfully disagree that the master plan had an open street grid. This is no longer a master plan because we don't have open street grids. until we have a conversation about an open street grid, you're fulfilling a building plan in a plan that does not exist anymore. So I suspect, and I would advocate to say that this is no longer a master plan because of the streets, and all things should be on the table for options. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Tammy, and thanks to folks from the Site 5 team. As I said at the beginning of this is the beginning of the conversation. This certainly is not the end. We're going to invite them back on a regular basis and keep the conversation going through this public forum. With that, we're going to move on to our next agenda item. We have two items that are next, which are citywide zoning text amendments that folks from the Department of City Planning are going to present on. The first is Elevate Transit. It's a zoning for accessibility. And again, I said it's a citywide zoning text amendment. Where is our team? Oh, I see Allison. Hi. Allison from
Hi,
the Department of City
Patrick.
Planning. Take it away.
Thanks. So I'm actually just going to be introducing the presenters. They're the real experts here. So Tony Lechuga, who is one of my colleagues in the Manhattan office at the Department of City Planning, is going to be, driving the presentation slides. And he's also joined by others at the MTA. And I'd actually just love for everyone to introduce themselves, because I think we have a pretty sizable group on before we start. So Tony, do you want to start with the introductions? Then we can go around. Is everyone able to unmute themselves? Great.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Tony Lechuga. I'm a planner in the Manhattan office, like Allison said. So I'm joined here tonight by my colleague Chris Lee, who's also from the Department of City Planning in our zoning division, and Munson Park from the MTA. I think you'll hear from all of us individually. So maybe we can just jump into it since we're sort of running behind the schedule. Does that work?
Great, thanks, Tony. And just generally, we'll be doing the presentation. Tony and team are really experts on the proposed text amendment. So any questions about that should be addressed to them. Any, site-specific questions about, Community District 1, or maybe how this relates to other projects being considered by the community board in the past or in the future. Those should be, for me, but also maybe we hold on to those for a later time since we're running so far behind. Great. Okay, thanks, Tony. Take it away.
Yeah, and I would just ask whoever's controlling things, can we make sure that Chris Lee and Munson are both also promoted, just so that they have the potential to answer questions and opine on things. So thanks for having us. In 2019, the New York City Council Land Use Division published the Let's Go report entitled Zoning for Transit Accessibility. And it proposed strengthening the existing zoning tools to accelerate implementation of ADA access across the city. So today, the MTA and the Department of City Planning are proposing a citywide zoning text amendment that builds on the ideas laid out in the City Council report. So that is where we get Elevate Transit, zoning for accessibility, or ZFA as we call it. So it's a citywide zoning text amendment that proposes to expand two specific zoning tools. The first is a transit easement requirement that would apply system-wide, and the second is a new transit improvement bonus program that would apply in the highest density parts of the city. The idea is that these two specific zoning tools would help us to better coordinate private development with station improvements. And before we get into the specifics of those two expansions, I'm going to turn it over to Munson, who's going to talk about sort of like why we're doing this at this time and where the MTA is at.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for your time this evening. So as we all know, our subway system is extremely old. It's over 100 years old. Most stations were built before 1950, which makes making them accessible very challenging. And we've made some progress in increasing accessibility. We've added accessibility to 11 stations last year alone. but we still have a long way to go. Right now, 136 out of the 493 subway and Staten Island railway stations are accessible, which is about 28% of all of our stations. We have a better track record with the commuter rail stations within the city limits, 25 out of our 39 commuter rail stations. And I just want to make clear that this proposal is really about achieving vertical accessibility. But when we do talk about accessible stations, there are many components to making stations accessible, but this zoning tool will help us with the hardest part, which is vertical accessibility in our stations. Next slide, please. So with less than a third of our stations accessible, it makes navigating the system very, very difficult for those who require an accessible station. This affects people with ambulatory disabilities, seniors, parents and guardians with young children, people with temporary injuries. And what could be a subway ride that is short and direct can often take much, much longer because those riders who require an elevator have to take a circuitous travel path. Next slide, please. About a quarter of our New Yorkers are potentially impacted by this lack of accessibility, system-wide accessibility. As you can see, over 500,000 New Yorkers have an ambulatory disability. We have an aging population. In fact, the New Yorkers over 65, the percentage of New Yorkers over 65 is growing at a faster rate than the overall New York population, speaking further to the need for system-wide accessibility. Next slide, please. But as mentioned, we added 11 new stations last year alone, and we are committed to accessibility. Our current capital plan dedicates more than $5 billion towards making more than 70 stations within New York City accessible. And what that means is that when the capital program is complete, 43% of our subway stations will be fully accessible. And a subway rider will not be more than 2 stations away from an accessible station in any of the 5 boroughs. But we do need more tools in our toolbox to help us get there to system-wide accessibility. And zoning for accessibility is such a tool. I do want to add that zoning for accessibility is not intended to replace any of our capital commitments, but only supplement our capital commitments. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned a few slides ago, the reason that it has taken us such a long time to get to accessibility is because our stations are old and we are in a very dense city, especially in CD1, which makes bringing them to accessibility very, very challenging, but not impossible. But we do have very narrow platforms, and you may recognize the station in the upper left-hand corner, which has a very narrow platform. We have some stations with very tight entrances, very tight fare control areas, but not just inside the stations, even outside the stations, we have very constrained conditions. We have very tight sidewalks in some areas, very crowded sidewalks, and even you don't see the condition here in CD1, but if you go in Brooklyn, the Bronx, and Queens, where we have many, many elevated stations, you see many of the platforms very close to the buildings, leaving no space in which to put an elevator on that sidewalk. So that is why this particular proposal will really help us address those conditions. And finally, we live in a city with just a web of underground utilities, and in some cases, they're not even mapped out. And when we do put an elevator on the sidewalk going down or up to our station, dealing with that underground infrastructure only adds a lot more time and a lot more cost to making that particular station accessible. So now I'm going to turn over the presentation back to Tony, who will explain the details of zoning for accessibility.
Yeah, so I just want to emphasize one thing that Munsun said, which is that, this is to work in conjunction with the MTA's capital plan. And the idea is that there are zoning tools in place today that help us alleviate some of the burdens that they face. So specifically the two that I mentioned before, transit easements and station bonus improvements, and ZFA seeks to expand those. So by leveraging station access improvements in places where investment is already going to occur and already occurring, these provisions will help speed up construction of station improvements and make sure that we have increased accessibility on top of what the MTA is already doing. But the zoning provisions that we have currently also have some limitations. So when we're talking about easements, so the first part of the proposal, I want people to keep in mind there are two parts. The first part, easement provisions. So they address the challenges of locating new station entrances as well as other transit amenities. So an easement is a small permanent space that would be reserved in a building for the transit agency to use in the future. They've traditionally been used for new station entrances, but they can also be used for passageways, ancillary facilities, as well as emergency egresses or ventilation structures. Currently, our easement provisions are limited to only a few parts of the city, such as along the 2nd Avenue subway. And so as a result, I'm sure many people can think of them, there have been missed opportunities to locate ADA access points at optimal locations that are next to stations, as exemplified in the picture here. The second part of the proposal is expanding transit bonus mechanisms, which exist already and help support the creation of transit improvements. So as you're all aware, I'm sure, in the densest commercial districts of the city, we've already incentivized the idea that developers can provide both the space and construction of station improvements, including ADA access, through floor area bonuses. And that just provides additional rights in exchange for the improvement. However, those provisions are also limited to sites that are immediately next to a subway station or next to the central business district, which doesn't help for many of the stations throughout the city. So zoning for accessibility addresses some of these limitations. So the idea is to create more opportunities for accessibility throughout the transit system by just expanding those two tools that we already have in our tool belt. So again, the first part, expand easement requirements system-wide to most station adjacent sites and provide zoning flexibility on sites where easements are provided to help offset potential burdens. And I'll get more into that in a second. And then the second part is to increase participation in the transit bonus program by increasing its area of applicability to other high density parts of the city. So the first part. The system-wide easement requirement would require all developments and enlargements on zoning lots within 50 feet of a mass transit station and in applicable zoning districts, which are outlined on the screen, to file an application with the MTA and the chairperson of the City Planning Commission to determine whether or not an easement is needed on that zoning lot for future station improvements. While the certification would be required for all sites within 50 feet of a transit station, it's anticipated the MTA would only ask for an easement in limited places that are best suited for access and require other improvements. So when you see maps of this, it shows lots of sites, but keep in mind it's not every site that will have one, just required to look into whether they should have one. So for Community District 1, this illustrative map shows where ZFA would be applicable. The red line shows the boundary of Community District 1. The light green dots show the stations where the proposed easement requirement would be in place. And that includes every station in Community District 1. The dark green areas on the map show zoning lots that are within 50 feet of an eligible station, where an easement may be required for future developments or enlargements. Again, it's just illustrative, but this is sort of like if you drew a bubble 50 feet in every direction from the station platform, as shown from the picture at the bottom right, this is sort of what it would capture. So the transit agency, in consultation with the developer and the chair of the CPC, would ultimately determine if it's necessary for an easement for future station upgrades. Depending on the needs of that individual station, transit easements can vary in shape and size. Vertical easements, which I don't believe would happen in your community district, would take up several floors, but more likely for CD1, you would see horizontal easements, and the footprint can depend, it can vary depending on whether or not there's an elevator or a new station entrance, sort of what that easement is needed for. So as such, because of this variation in easement it has different shapes and sizes, easement areas can affect developments in a lot of different ways. So to make sure that easements can take up floor area because easements can take up floor area by occupying several floors on a site, they can also restrict ground floor uses and create lots of compatibility issues with surrounding uses. So without any zoning relief, we actually see a lot of problems with developments being limited in making sure that they meet their surroundings in the best possible way. So that's why, as part of zoning for accessibility, we're trying to make sure that an easement creates minimal challenges for construction on a given site and matches the built context as best as possible. So the zoning, we would provide targeted relief to sites requiring an easement. And those 5 categories are on the screen. 4 of them would apply to Community District 1. The only one that wouldn't apply is parking. And I'm going to go through each of those individually now. So the proposed floor area and open space relief includes excluding easements from floor area calculations. This allows developments to still reach their maximum FAR despite there being an easement on their site. And to make sure easements are placed at an optimal location on the site, they would be considered permitted obstructions. And where applicable, maximum lot coverage would be increased. The second is height and setbacks. So the proposed height modifications would allow for sites to increase their maximum height by 10 feet to allow for developable floor space that would be taken up by an easement. Again, this is just because an easement is taking up space, they might need an additional bit of height in order to maximize FAR. There would also be greater street wall flexibility provided within 15 feet of an easement in order to create better flow around to those spaces where we know a lot of people are going to be coming in and out of a station. Use allowances are proposed in the zoning to help activate spaces around easements. So this includes allowing vacant easements to be temporarily used as commercial spaces until the MTA sort of exercises their claim over it. It also includes allowing retail uses within 30 feet of easements in residential districts. So normally we wouldn't want to have a residence immediately adjacent to an easement. So this would allow for a tapering off of foot traffic by allowing commercial spaces adjacent to it. Modifications to streetscape requirements would be provided by excluding general streetscape rules like ground floor use regulations, transparency rules, and plantings. And to ensure the safety of transit users who are entering and leaving stations, curb cuts would be restricted within 30 feet of all easements. And then finally, with this, every site is unique, has potential additional challenges. So the proposal allows for even further flexibility for sites that are uniquely constrained through an additional authorization. So for height specifically, sites could seek an additional height increase of up to 25%. Or if they request more height relief than that, they would need to seek a special permit. So while the initial process of obtaining an easement is a certification, keep in mind that these additional forms of relief in terms of additional height would actually require some discretionary review. So if they wanted to do this, they would actually have to go through, like I said, an authorization or a special permit, which means that it would get referred to the community board. Excuse me. So while an easement requirement only applies to developments enlargements on sites that on lots that have an area of 5,000 square foot or greater, and in applicable zoning districts. Easements might also be provided voluntarily on smaller sites. And for those sites that choose to provide an easement, the same zoning relief would apply. And that's the first part of ZFA, the easement, system-wide easement requirements. The second piece of the proposal is the expanded transit bonus program that would be optional for sites that are near a mass transit station. So as I mentioned earlier, today's subway bonus mechanism grants a floor area bonus of up to 20% for a significant station improvement, but that only applies to station adjacent sites in limited parts of the city. With ZFA, the proposed transit bonus program would, one, continue to grant a floor area bonus of up to 20% of the maximum FAR for developments and enlargements that construct station improvements. The second part is that it would expand the geography of where a transit bonus can be used. So the bonus would be subject to a discretionary review process in the form of an authorization by the City Planning Commission. So again, this would get referred to the community board after certifying with the City Planning Commission. So the proposed expanded geography is into other high density areas. So it includes all R9 and R10 districts in the city and their commercial equivalent and M16 districts. So the new transit bonus would allow sites that are within 500 feet of a station to participate in exchange for an offsite improvement that would be constructed at a station that's not immediately adjacent to the site, just within the 500 feet of it. For Community District 1, it's important to note that in central business districts, that distance would be expanded to 1,500 feet. So for Community District 1, this is again an illustrative map showing the expansion of the bonus provision applicability for this community district. The blue dots show the current program's applicability, which is the central business district. The pink dots show the stations where the proposed transit bonus would now be applicable, expanding the program to some additional sites in Community District 1, mainly those at the north, or entirely those at the northern part of the district. The orange color shows sites that are within 500 feet of the station and within an applicable zoning district. And the purple color shows sites within 1,500 feet of a station in the central business district that would be eligible to participate in the program. So to receive a bonus, development would have to construct a significant station improvement. The improvements can vary depending on the station needs and the bonus amount that the developer sought. It's important to note that if a station doesn't have ADA access, that must be the first improvement that a developer provides. The amount of bonus that would be given to a development would be proportional to whatever the improvements are that they are providing. And floor area generated from the bonus can only be occupied once the MTA determines that improvements are in fact complete and usable by the public. Now, if needed, developments could seek additional relief from zoning provisions. So depending on what the applicant seeks, modifications could either be subject to an additional authorization that would allow a height increase of up to 25%, or through a special permit if further height relief is needed. So other relief that would be made available through discretionary review and approval include modifications to use, loading, and streetscape. And modifications pursuant to the authorization or special permit would be subject to specific findings to prove that that relief is needed. And those would be sent along with the application to the CPC as well as the community board to determine, if your agreement or validity to the findings. So, in conclusion, zoning for accessibility proposes two things. One, a system-wide easement requirement would require all new developments within 50 feet of MTA stations and within applicable zoning districts to seek a certification determining if they must provide an easement. This is the only non-discretionary review proposed in ZFA. The second part is an expansion of the Transit Improvement Bonus Program. Excuse me, sorry. And this allows for floor area bonus in exchange for significant transit improvements, and that happens through an authorization. Both the easement and the bonus provisions would allow for further zoning modifications because of possible unique conditions, and those could be sought through an authorization, which includes an additional height increase of 25%, or a special permit for anything beyond that. Okay. So we're currently in the middle of the public review process of this text amendment. We're asking for your recommendations for the City Planning Commission about this proposal. Official recommendations from all 59 community boards, borough boards, and borough presidents are requested. We would like to have them by June 14th of this year. Thanks for your time, and we're happy to answer any questions that you have right now.
All right. Allison, did you have anything to add specific to any projects within, you mentioned anyway, that you might have something specific with regard to projects in our community district?
No, just if there were particular questions about how this relates to specific sites, I would say that that's a question for me, and we should probably talk about it maybe at a later time, so we're not, you know, taking up the this team, the ZFA team's time.
Okay. So just to orient the committee, I mean, we've looked at this issue in a specific application in the last couple of years at 45 Broad, as folks probably remember. So if you kind of put your memory hat back on for that, then that might help with the questioning. Let's see. I see Rosa has her hand up.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Tony and Munson, for the presentation. I learned a lot. I wanted to applaud this effort because I think that accessibility with our public transit system is long overdue, and it is a beast to try to get through, especially in a city as dense as our neighborhood is, and with sidewalks as narrow as our neighborhood has. It's frankly almost an impossibility trying to do that on public land. And so I agree 100% that pursuing options that go on to private land make this at least, you know, vaguely achievable, which is great. However, I do have a couple of concerns, and I'm just going to sort of, you know, go through them quickly. I do appreciate that you guys have, you know, streamlined the process, although based on your presentation, I'm not sure how streamlined it is, because it looks like some portions go to CPC and then some portions get booted back to the community board and CPC. And so there's, you know, still that sort of timeline concern of how long this review takes and how, you know, how many times it has to go back and forth. So that's one concern. The other concern was that under page 6 of your amended text amendment, under expanded transit improvement program, it says including but not limited to accessibility improvements. And to me, that's incredibly vague and leaves the door open for a lot of different things. And while I understand that you said that the accessibility is the #1 priority, that's just too vague. Because it allows for a lot of land grabbing by the MTA without commitments of what that's going to entail. Under page 8, under temporary uses, you're basically describing areas where or situations where the MTA can enter into an agreement with a private developer that they do need this space. And then theoretically, they're going to enter into an agreement of, you know, what additional FAR they're going to have and whatever, you know, height restrictions they're able to exceed, and et cetera, et cetera. But then it goes under temporary uses. So that means the MTA doesn't actually end up occupying the space. It may or may not get built out. As we saw in the photograph that you showed, it was being used as a Dunkin' Donuts and something else. It's concerning because basically what you're doing is you're giving a private entity the ability to make profit off of a public gift, and then not ensuring that restricted use that you're basically, getting in exchange actually happens. And I'm guessing that then authority and control and, financial benefit from that temporary use reverts to the developer and not necessarily the MTA. And so what does the public get out of that in that situation? And then, tangentially, there's also, the termination agreement that you reference in the text, which is troubling because then it's the same scenario, except it's permanent. Like, let's say that there is a decision that the MTA needs to have a certain amount of space set aside. They never actually end up using it. Eventually 20 years pass and, they decide, oh, okay, we don't need it anymore. The easement reverts back to the developer and this agreement is terminated, but then the developer has already built out the space that they were awarded based on this agreement. So it seems like I absolutely agree that the developer must be compensated in some way for the land grab that the MTA would be doing on their land. That totally makes sense to me. Otherwise, there's no incentive for them to participate in this. But we also need to ensure that the promised benefit to the community is actually fulfilled and utilized, and doesn't just revert right back to the developer for unknown period of time or perhaps permanently, which is a concern. Then touching a little bit on the subject that was in the previous discussion, it also says that any additional FAR grant would not need to comply with mandatory and voluntary inclusionary housing, or it's not subject to the inclusionary housing requirements. And given that the inclusionary housing is something that's obviously, as you may have heard if you were in the previous discussion, very important to our community and absolutely necessary for our community, I would encourage you to consider that again and have any additional FAR granted still be applicable in terms of the usage as relates to mandatory and voluntary inclusionary housing. I think that's it. Thank you very much for your time.
Would you like us to respond?
Yeah, I can address a
yes, please.
I can address a few of those and then maybe kick it over to the MTA to add in as well. So I think I jotted down all the things, but please correct me if I didn't. So the first thing that you brought up was the nature of improvements. So yes, the first thing that must be provided is ADA access. After that, the goal of this is to improve access and circulation in and around sites. So stairs, escalators, associated works such as passageways, those are things that could also receive bonuses based on the MTA's determination of their need within a particular site. So I don't believe that we're talking about just pure aesthetic improvements, if that's like what was motivating your concern, but the goal really is circulation and access improvements are what would trigger the bonus.
Great if
I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yes, it would be great if the text could be more specific about that, because it could also go to infrastructural, land for whatever the MTA needs, whether it be bathroom for their workers, or office space, or lunch space, or whatever. It could be, storage room space for their equipment, for maintenance. It could be a lot of different things, and it's just too open-ended. I agree 100% with the need for additional circulation beyond just elevator access, but perhaps that could be more specific.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, no, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you so much for taking such a close read of the proposed zoning text. It really helps the conversation. I do agree, Tony's absolutely right. The text is intended to be for access and circulation improvements, and with the focus on accessibility. And it's not for back of house improvements. It's not for beautification. It is really for helping us, especially in stations that some stations are having capacity issues. It may be a widening of a stair. It may be to provide another means of getting into the station. And we are confronted with that situation as, I mean, not in the past year, but certainly up until the past year, we've had increased ridership. And we do anticipate once we get past this current period in time that those ridership numbers will continue to increase. So it is to help with exactly those types of improvements. Tony, now there were a few other points which I would certainly like to address. I don't know if you'd like to address them first regarding the temporary use, and then you can.
I think the only thing that I had to say about temporary use of easements is that, so generally easement requirements have been a part of the special transit land use district, which is specific to providing easements for the future Second Avenue subway system. And so perhaps there's been an experience of easements being required and then they do sit empty for a while in anticipation of that being constructed. I think given the fact that these new easement requirements would be built on top of existing subway infrastructure limits the scope of potential for seeing easements go unused for an extended period of time. But, I think Munson, maybe you can speak to that more.
No, there are some similarities, obviously, to the Special Transit Land Use District, but the difference being, as Tony mentioned, that this would be for existing stations, and we only see ourselves acquiring an easement from a developer when we really need one, because we see that there is really no other optimal location to put in an elevator. And when we have that easement, that will help us for future capital programs to identify that station as a station that needs that particular improvement, ideally for accessibility. So I hopefully that will help address your question. And I don't foresee us taking an easement and then having to give it back, because we would only get an easement when we really need one. And then I don't know if you or Chris want to respond to the question about the MIH.
Yeah. So the additional floor area associated with housing. So I understand the sentiment there. I think that the idea behind this is that they are providing a monetary contribution in the form of a station improvement, and so I don't know that we would see the bonus as them receiving something for free, and so it might disincentivize the use of the bonus to say whatever bonus you get has to be used for MIH in particular. Developers might just say that financially is not going to work for me, and yeah, maybe Chris can speak to this, having more intimately written the text.
Good evening, everybody. This is Chris Lee. Thank you for your questions. So yeah, just to kind of reiterate what Tony said, we're really trying to tie the amount of floor area that is generated through the transit bonus to the actual improvements that are being provided for that specific subway station. It's really how much are you providing and how much is the improvement going to benefit the general public in terms of accessibility, in terms of the use of the station, all that kind of consideration would determine how much floor area could be generated through the transit bonus. And that is sort of separate from inclusionary housing. What we're trying to do is to provide as much flexibility for somebody to be able to provide inclusionary housing, as well as utilize the transit bonus to provide some kind of transit improvement at a specific transit station. I do want to point out, though, that a lot of sites that could possibly use inclusionary housing are actually at the R10 density level. What that means is that if they wanted to use inclusionary housing and the transit bonus, they would not be able to exceed 12 FAR after utilizing inclusionary housing. So in other words, the bonus floor area would be used for commercial or community facility use or other non-residential uses. So in both scenarios, if they're to use the transit bonus with inclusionary housing, or if they were to just use inclusionary housing itself, that the amount of inclusionary housing would be the same because they're really capped at 12 FAR due to the multiple dwelling law. There are limited places where districts are zoned R9 and they can use inclusionary housing. In that situation, as I explained, we're trying to tie the additional floor area generated from the transit bonus to the improvements themselves.
As I'm looking at this map, I also just have one final question that I had forgotten about. Basically, almost the entirety of our downtown neighborhood is under the 1,500-foot area of applicability. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Am I understanding it correctly then, that basically means that every property within that purple area theoretically could contribute to transit improvements? So every single property owner could apply to do this, and basically if they commit to, let's say, funding an improvement offsite because they are not within the actual physical distance to be able to connect to a subway station, then they could fund a project somewhere else and then receive the FAR increase?
So yes, it's nearly every site theoretically, but those sites would have, it's 1,500 feet from that station. So they would have to provide the improvement to the station that they are within 1,500 feet of. So we're not going to see a development in Lower Manhattan providing offsite improvements in Queens. It's only that station that's within 1,500 feet. And that sort of limits the potential for, every single site that's in purple taking advantage of this, because at some point the potential sub-transit improvements will disappear. Many of those stations in the center of the district are already ADA accessible. So the MTA would have to say, is there even the potential for some sort of circulation-based improvement at this site? And if there's not, then any site that's within 1,500 feet of that station can't actually get this bonus because there is no improvement that the MTA deems as necessary on that site. And so some of those sites that aren't ADA accessible, yeah, there might be a site that could come in and put in an elevator and then it becomes ADA accessible and that one site gets the bonus. But any site after them, then we have to question, what improvements do we need beyond the ADA access that exists there? And if those don't exist, then they can't get the bonus even if they want it. And so those are some of the factors that limit the total number of buildings that could possibly take advantage of this. So sometimes the broad swaths of color are frightening because we're just trying to show this is any site that it covers, but it's legitimately not every single site within that color can take advantage of this.
Thank you for clarifying that it must be within the area of a specific station. But just to play devil's advocate, and Patrick, I'm so sorry this is taking so long, but there's a contentious project in our neighborhood called 250 Water. And I'm not quite sure based on your map whether or not that would be applicable, but theoretically, if it fell within the purple area and was close to a station that did not have vertical accessibility at the moment, theoretically they could contribute financially to the improvement of that station and gain an extra 20% FAR theoretically.
So
I'm just wondering if that's even possible.
Well, given that site is currently under consideration, and this is still in the process of being approval, they would have to wait quite a while before they sought their approvals in order to see if this one gets passed, and then two, would they be able to apply for it? Because it's not just a financial contribution. They actually have to identify the site. They have to construct that particular improvement before they're allowed to occupy any bonusable space that they would be given. And yes, it is up to 20%. But it's up to the discretion of a conversation amongst the MTA, the CPC, and the community board to determine, is this bonus commensurate with 20%, or is it commensurate with 10% or 5%? So theoretically, yes, a development in the seaport could take advantage of it. I'm not sure of the specific location if it falls within the purple, but I believe it does.
But the bonus wouldn't override existing zoning necessarily, right? So if they had to do a ULURP application, for example, in other words, they would have to go through that process, become zoning approved in order to even be eligible for the bonus, right?
Yes.
They would have to go through an authorization process again.
Yeah.
So they can't just simply lop on this bonus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they're going to have to
You would go
back.
through a separate discretionary process on top of whatever ULURP they have to go through already. Yeah.
Okay.
I'd also add in that for that particular site, it is in a historic district, so LPC also needs to approve the ultimate height and design. So there's just like another layer for that particular site that was mentioned.
Great. Okay, thanks, Rosa, for that. We're going to move on to Jason, then Tammy.
Guys, so I wanted to just a couple questions. One was what was it about our district that you guys felt like you needed to expand the 1500 to the 1500 area? And my concern there is that, you know, you start tossing floor area from different districts in our richly, you know, differentiated zoning districts down here, and we have kind of problems that are not contextual because of that big circle that you created. So the question is, why is it like that, and if there's any other districts like it? And two, you know, since I see our district is so full of ADA accessible stations, could we put something in there that like means this program ends at a certain point? So like after you have 99% penetration, you know, it's done, it's over. We close the program, and, you know, then it kind of doesn't allow for, you know, later people to come in and just do that quote land grab. And that's it.
Yeah, I think I might let Chris speak to the expansion of the 1500 area of applicability, but I think you actually pointed out one of the successes of this program, and that's that it's already existed in Community Board 1. It's one of the few areas that has had this transit bonus, and there are a lot of sites in the Central Business District that are accessible, which demonstrates the potential for it to work. I'll turn it over to Chris to maybe speak to why the 1500 was chosen for central business districts.
Sure. Yeah. So this expansion of applicability to 1500 square or 1500 feet from a station not only applies to Lower Manhattan, it applies to other central business districts like Midtown, portions of Hudson Yards, Garment Center, Long Island City, and the reason for expanding the applicability from the 500 feet that would apply under our proposal to other places outside of these central business districts to 1500 feet is because the central business districts generally have a higher concentration of stations. So what we see is that sometimes people are not necessarily utilizing one station, but multiple stations within a network. So if a new development is being proposed, the tenants of these new developments occurring within a central business district could possibly generate new riders that would utilize multiple stations. So that's why we decided to increase the land use nexus to a 1500-foot radius in these areas.
Thanks. All right, Tammy, then Alice, please.
I'd like to know, thank you very much for the presentation. I wondered, you're expecting a resolution from us, but we actually, I don't think can opine and give you our answer by the deadline you're giving us in June. Because if we have questions tonight and we're expecting Allison Brown or one of you to bring us answers back, then our process couldn't be to actually be able to pass a resolution tonight and then pass it at full board in May, which would get to you by your deadline. How hard and fast is that deadline? Because one would hope that we would have more than 30 days to actually review and know this information.
Yeah, so this was referred to the community boards back in April. So presumably boards have had a bit longer to look at it. You know, this was the date that the presentation was scheduled, but you know, the referral window is sort of standard for this type of project. So it's a pretty hard and fast date for those referrals, given the desire to have this project finalized on a specific timeline. Yeah, I'm not sure what other guidance I can provide on that, other than that it's sort of the standard referral window.
So Allison Brown, I'm going to ask if you can push that back, and I'm going to ask that at the borough board as well, simply because this is the first presentation that Community Board 1 has seen on this text amendment. It is a very wide-reaching text amendment. So unless you're able to give us answers to all the questions that are raised in the same meeting, it doesn't actually offer the community the appropriate timeline to be able to opine and pass a resolution. I think that's actually, it doesn't make a difference when you refer it if you're not going to present it and explain it.
Okay, so what is the date that you would like to provide a resolution?
If you get back to us with whatever questions, I mean, if the committee feels that they're ready to pass one tonight, then that's fine. You know, I'll wait to the end, but otherwise, you know, I was looking and saying, well, we have a land use meeting now, we're getting the information, and then we'd have to pass one next month. So you would get a resolution from Community Board 1 after June 22nd, which is our full board in June.
Do we have any unanswered questions yet?
I don't know. I'm going to keep going. I know specifically when we're talking about sites that it would apply to, and you've been asked about 250 water. I'm actually asking about that.
Go ahead.
My question is about the jails. There is a subway station that's over by Canal Street and Franklin, and the jails that are being built in northern Tribeca on our side of the line. How would this impact that area? Because those areas are now the proposed additional transit bonus stations, but it is out of the, I would assume that would mean that the purple area extends all the way up to the landline on Canal.
So two things. One, 250 Water Street, somebody actually looked it up, is in a C6 district, so it's actually not an applicable district for this bonus. So we can put that one to rest. It could not apply for this bonus. The second part of your question, I think I was a little confused by your expression that the purple extends to the border.
The new transit bonus stations that you're looking at,
yep,
are within the area of where the new jail is being built, which is absolutely within 500 feet for applicability of those stations. So that's what I'm asking.
Allison, maybe you can speak to that. I'm not familiar with the location of the jail.
Sure. So the jail is located just south of Canal Street on the very eastern border of the district. So it is close to one of the pink stations highlighted here, and it is within the yellow area, I believe.
Okay.
And what would be the process, Allison? Like, would they have to go back into ULURP to apply for an additional bonus?
So I guess I'm wondering at what time are you proposing this? Because this scenario, this hypothetical, this project just came in front of the community, there was an approved envelope that is being pursued. So I guess I'm just wondering, are you questioning a scenario in which that proposed plan is then revised in some way to also incorporate a subway improvement process and go through the process of this new action that Tony and team have presented?
Yes. Or would it, or potentially because they've already gone through ULURP for this project and they are in a project build mode, would it be handled differently?
I mean, they've already gotten approvals for a project, so I guess I'm just wondering, like, the likelihood of a project at this stage going back to seek new actions, just generally, like, let's not even just put aside this particular project. It feels a little unlikely, especially when there doesn't seem to be a need for the proposed building to be larger than the size that was approved, right? Just thinking back to the actions and the project that was proposed. I guess I'm just questioning, like, the likeliness of that particular scenario for that particular site.
I don't know what they will do. It's not a very public process in terms of what the building's going to look like or how high or how wide, et cetera, et cetera. And so I don't know. And I'm asking the question, is there a potential that they would be able to go back to the city with this new ruling and ask for a modification of the ULURP that might not come back before the community board? It's a major project. It's in your zones, and that's where I'm asking.
There's no way that this would not that it would not come back before the community board, because any development that is seeking the transit improvement bonus, it's an authorization, so it does get referred back to the community board. So that particular project, having already gone through ULURP, they would have to seek a modification to their ULURP application that was already approved, and they would have to seek an additional authorization for this bonus, which means it would have to go back through a whole review process of going to the city planning commission, going to the community board to approve that authorization, and then back to the city planning commission. So I think it's really just that the likelihood of them choosing to do that is very limited.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Alice, and then we'll go to the public, please.
Quick question. Thanks very much. Could you just describe the scenario of when a developer who's applying for this bonus wouldn't get the bonus, assuming they're, doing all the crossing their I's and dotting their I's and crossing their T's? When wouldn't they get the 20% bonus?
I'm sorry, you're saying
how would that not happen?
How would it not happen?
Yeah, right. What would stop that?
So if an applicant comes to the city planning commission and requests a bonus of a particular size and offers a particular contribution of a public or of a transit improvement, there would have to be that's where sort of the discretionary process comes into play of the city, those of us who work for city planning, analyzing that and saying, like, with our colleagues at the MTA, is this an improvement that you actually need? Is this a public benefit? And then determining, like, what is the square footage that they're asking for? What is the benefit that they're providing? Do we think that those are commensurate? That once they've gone through the whole application process, which could take, years, that will get sent to the city planning commission, who then again looks at the findings that are presented by the applicant and determines either yes, the amount of bonus they are providing is commensurate with what they're asking for in terms of a percentage FAR bonus, and then once it's certified by the city planning commission as their application is complete, it will get referred to all of you, who can then also opine on are these commensurate or not.
So a transit elevator, if the community didn't deem that as being a critical thing at the particular spot, let me ask it differently. would city planning ever consider that instead of transit, it might be better to have privately owned public space or some other public amenity, or it has to be this transit?
Yeah,
Right.
under this proposed text, it has to be a transit improvement, and
Right.
it is focused on pedestrian circulation and access to stations.
Right. So basically, it's a great and clever way to have the private developer, get 20% and pay for an MTA improvement. But it doesn't necessarily allow for the public to really appreciate what is really essential in their community in terms of an amenity. It's already been selected for us. And I bring this up only because I think when Patrick mentioned 45 Broad, that was precisely what was discussed in part was, did the public really need that amenity? And, I just leave that, for the committee to consider.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I think from our perspective at the Department of City Planning and the MTA, we see any improvement that is providing ADA access as critical and a very much an important public
Right.
amenity.
No one would argue that. In fact, that became a very difficult argument to ever really confront, needless to say. But in this particular case of 45 Broad, if I'm right, there was another accessible spot very, very nearby, and there was great concern for the amount of additional square footage of housing and such. But anyway, it's not a slam dunk, needless to say, but it's an interesting policy idea. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Alice. Betty, I see you've put your hand up.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to say that I'm a strong supporter of this. As someone who uses a mobility device, I'm a little chagrined by how many people are way overestimating how accessible our neighborhood is, because it's not for transit. So I do strongly support this, and I urge the other members to please be a little bit generous of spirit. It's 30 years since the ADA was passed. We have 70% unemployment rate among people with disabilities. And I keep hearing people talk about how everything is so accessible. It is not. We also have a growing elderly population and a large number of people with strollers. Those may not be people you're thinking about, but they're looking for these improvements too. So thank you, and thank you for pursuing this text amendment.
Thanks so much, Betty. Any other members of the committee? Just one quick pass through. Okay, let's go to the public. Gerald Forsberg, you have your hand up.
Yes, hi, Betty. Thank you for that, and all the CB1 members. Thank you for your questions. It seems that there's been a lot of work done on this, very creative ways to bring accessibility to the neighborhood, and looks like there's a bit of precedent here as well. I kind of have two questions. One is specific in regards to the height increases or the bonuses with what's being proposed. Is there any way to link this to affordable housing? In other words, is there any way to those height increases to specify that those increases should be or can be or must be affordable, whether it's 100% or well, I'll just leave it at that. So that's my first question. The second question is more of a land use question, and forgive my naivete in regards to the MTA, but in my time in New York City, I've heard a lot about, well, a 100-year-old system. I've used the system. Obviously, we've all used the system. We know where it lacks, where it's a love-hate type of relationship. And I know there's a lot of concerns about resiliency. Is there or has there ever been discussion about an elevated light rail system, FDR, West Street, to just looking at it at the map here? Has there ever been a discussion about that for the future? Because it seems like $5 billion at this point is for only a 43% rate of accessibility in the system seems like a Band-Aid to a bigger problem that's going to eventually bite us all in the ass 20, 30 years out. I'm fully supportive of accessibility. I would agree with Betty that I do not use anything at this point, but my best friend growing up was quadriplegic. A very, very good friend of mine in college was bound to a wheelchair, and I've spent countless hours with these people slogging through snow in a wheelchair, just trying to find an accessible route. So I'm very much in support of accessibility, but those are my two questions: affordable housing and the long-term plan with planning and the MTA. Thank you.
Yeah, well, we can answer the first question, and then I'll kick it over to the MTA to talk about the second. So in terms of linking to affordable housing, when we analyzed these things internally, we decided that for those areas that are voluntary inclusionary housing areas where developers can seek a bonus through VIH, we didn't want to pit the idea of affordable housing and transit improvements against each other. And so that is the one area where if a developer wants to seek a bonus through voluntary inclusionary housing, as well as a bonus through a transit improvement, they can provide both of those. And that was sort of the one mechanism we saw where we could actually get a developer to do affordable housing. In terms of mandating that any floor area generated through a transit bonus improvement be dedicated to affordable housing, I think our concern was that the financial aspects of providing that amenity and affordable housing would not match up and would deter developers from choosing to opt into the transit bonus program if they were required to provide affordable housing on that site. So that was sort of our thinking on that process, but I'll turn it over to the MTA, who can maybe talk about your second question.
So in regards to the question about long-term planning, we do have our 5-year capital plans, which there is a lot of planning involved in creating those capital plans. And making 77 new stations accessible is a big undertaking and would be quite an achievement for us as well. And $5 billion is a historic commitment for accessibility for the MTA. And I must say that having zoning for accessibility will only speed up the number of stations that we will get accessible. And it will help us also to make stations that in areas that in other neighborhoods that don't have the bonus program, but they because we do long-term planning as part of the capital plan, it will help us also to spread out our resources around the city, because the goal is system-wide accessibility. The goal is to get people who live in one borough but work in another borough or want to travel to be able to get to take an elevator at their home station and then take an elevator at their destination station and not have to backtrack to go from one station to another.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And in terms of long-term planning, has there ever been, or will there ever be, a discussion about elevated railway in specifically on Manhattan? I know there's elevated heavy rail elsewhere, but what about light rail in Manhattan?
Do you mean like elevated, like an elevated subway station, or light rail that's at street level?
Light rail that is elevated above street level.
I don't know, but I can certainly take that question back and ask at the MTA.
Thanks.
Okay, I thought we had one other member of the public with their hand up, but it does not appear it's still up. So with that, oh, there it is, Mike. Lost you
Sorry,
again.
I hit clear. Mike, could you put your hand back up so I know to unmute you?
Mike Schwinsberg.
Patrick, if the committee feels they're ready to go, then don't wait for me, you know.
Yeah. Mike Schwinsberg.
Right. Hi. My name is Mike Schwinsberg, and I am the president of the 504 Democratic Club, a citywide club which is the nation's first and largest advocating for the civil rights of people with disabilities. And you've heard this before, if you remember. A couple of years ago, we were very pleased to be among the pioneers, and you too, your board was the pioneer board in this kind of effort, 45 Broad Street. I remember coming to the meeting, and you had a pretty evenly divided transportation committee on the issue. I think 8 or 9 of us spoke, and by the time we left, there was unanimous consent by the board, by the committee. We followed up with the board, and I think everybody voted yes except for 1 no and 1 abstention. We carried it on to city planning, and then I testified at the city council, and that made us the first to do this. So congratulations. You actually helped birth this whole idea, and that you cooperated in that regard should be a proud part of your history. You know, in one of the slides, they enumerated all the other communities that would benefit from elevator placement: seniors, mothers with strollers, shoppers, delivery people, all that. That is what's known as the curb cut effect. Virtually anytime you provide accessibility for people with disabilities, you're also benefiting the general public in many, many ways, unforeseen ways. But above all, please always remember that people with disabilities are the largest minority. We are totally intersectional. We're found in every single segment of society. And when you do anything to uplift people with disabilities, remember that people with disabilities are also women. With disabilities also come from communities of color. We are immigrants. We are veterans. We are seniors. We are every single marginalized community you can speak of, and the one that is thought of last when it comes to any kind of, accommodations or help. So as you were the pioneers of this effort back in 2018, we hope that you will move swiftly to support it, along with other community boards I know are, looking at this very positively. I don't have a question. I just wanted to offer those comments.
Thanks, Mike. And certainly we remember you from the discussion in 2018. I think one thing I didn't hear talked about in this presentation, but what struck me during that conversation and debate was the unemployment numbers of folks with disabilities because of the inability to get around the system was staggering, somewhere in the 40% range, if I remember correctly. Maybe it was even higher, but
67%.
Yeah, it was
unemployment rate among people with disabilities who are ready, willing, and able to work is 67%. Moved only 3 ticks from the 70% level we were at before passage of the ADA, which was intended to help create employment opportunities. But because, as I say, our issues are always addressed last, that hasn't been the case. And so, yes, it's prevented us from getting to work, keeping jobs because we're late when, the elevator's broken down or there's some other interference with it. So this is very, very meaningful in a great many ways to a community that has been underserved for, well, since time began.
I see Michael Francor, you have your hand up.
Yes, I do. Thanks, Patrick. And thanks. That was a really informative presentation. So I'm glad I tuned in for it. I just wanted to say that, I agree with everything that's been said. and I really welcome creative policies that will help us to increase the accessibility of our transportation system. I really do view the lack of accessibility in our transportation system as one of the great shames in our city. So yeah, so just thank you for the team's efforts on this, and it's important.
Thanks, Michael. One question I think that's come to mind too is instead of, and I'm not questioning whether this is a worthy goal, but we talked about the zoning tools and the zoning toolbox. Have there been other ways or means considered to try to gain these kinds of improvements and accessibility? In other words, things like tax incentives for developers, that sort of thing, outside of adding additional floor area and density?
Not that I'm aware of as it relates to tax incentives.
Yeah,
No.
that might be a good question for Chris, if zoning had any discussions about that.
Yeah, the expansion of the transit bonus really came from the existing subway bonus that we have today, and we saw that it was a pretty good model with some limitations, and what we wanted to do was to build on some of the successes of this bonus mechanism, but also expand it and kind of address some of the issues that we've been observing over the last several years since it was introduced. So we really kept to what is the existing special permit doing, and how can we improve this program, and how can we accelerate accessibility throughout the city through this existing tool.
Gotcha. Thanks.
If I could quickly, I'm sorry, add upon
That's
what
okay.
Chris just said. The idea also came about from a number of missed opportunities, especially for the MTA to get an easement from developers, because this easement requirement doesn't exist really around the city. And with all of the developments that have been happening up until the pandemic, there were a number of developments that we really could have extremely benefited from getting an easement right when they were developing on top next to our station in Manhattan as well as outside of Manhattan, and we couldn't. And so we're going to have to put an elevator in a really less optimal location, which will be much more expensive and also lead to a more circuitous path for those who need an elevator. So we're really trying to avoid that situation by getting this adopted now.
Yeah, that's a great point. I know, just drawing back again to the 45 Broad issue, one of the chief problems with that specific proposal was the location or siting of that elevator, one within an actual historic street bed, the only one in the city, but also smack right in front of another residential building's entrance, which was not ideal, but you know, we have to make trade-offs. But this sort of eliminates that trade-off, I guess, if you're able to get the easements in place on the front end. So that does make a lot of sense. So thanks for adding that point. So with that, let me ask our committee members. I for one, am fine and ready to proceed with a resolution, but are there those who feel you need more time, that we need to consider more information to come to a reasoned resolution? Just feel free to unmute yourselves and speak up if so.
This is Rosa. I have a question if we're going to do that tonight. And this is for Allison. What is the overlap of this with the zoning for coastal resiliency?
I think that this might be actually a question for the team, but yeah, actually, if I could ask the team to respond to this.
Sure. I mean, ZICFR is really going to apply in specific areas where the flood zone is, and this would just be added on to ZICFR. So if you're an easement site and you're providing an easement, which is below grade, what ends up happening is your measurement of height is different as a result of ZICFR, because it's changing how you measure the height. And on top of that, you would get 10 additional feet of a height increase through zoning for accessibility. So it will work together.
They layer on top of each other. It's not.
That's right.
It is possible to utilize both.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Oh, okay, great. Then
if you
one other.
if you were in the area of both, if both apply to you based off of your geography.
I do
That would
want
be
to
a
mention.
select sites.
Right.
I do want to point out though that in the Lower Manhattan Special District, a lot of these buildings are non-contextual districts, so they're not limited to the traditional building height caps. They're non-contextual and they're towers. So yeah.
Right. Okay. And then weirdly in our specific district, because of the size of a lot of our sites, I mean, you have a section in there that says something about you have a 30-foot separation between the easement and any legally required windows, I believe. I think that might take out a lot of use possibilities. And also if you do have an elevator and let's say the elevator machine room goes to the second floor because you need to access the ground level, then does that also mean that because the elevator machine room is there on the second floor, you couldn't theoretically include residential on the second floor?
So
because you also have resi use conflicting with the easement space?
So there's multiple ways of configuring an easement, and we can't possibly figure out all the different ways of fitting an easement on a development site. So one can imagine an easement, and this again does not necessarily apply to your site, but it's in a situation where there's an elevated station and you wanted to separate the building from the easement area and have the elevator or the additional station entrance in the future that would be built by the MTA to be separate from your entire development, then we would require that any sort of windows, legally required windows, would be 30 feet from the easement area. But in a situation where you're incorporating the entire easement within your building, then that rule would not apply because it would just
okay. Thank you for that clarification.
it would just be subsumed within the building. And
okay,
yeah,
I'm not sure that was clear in the text, but that's helpful to know. Thank you.
Thanks, Rosa. All right, other committee members, feel free to unmute if there's some major objection to proceeding now, and not hearing any. It sounds like we're good to do a resolution.
Patrick?
Yes?
The only thing I want to mention is we are also on record for saying that we don't think that zoning as a financial incentive is the way to go. We said that in zoning for coastal resiliency. We have a resolution on it saying that we sought the city to think of other inventive resolutions to achieve the goals needed. So I'm bringing that up because I stand by that. We passed it not so many months ago. And I do think in the current coming out of a pandemic where people are looking for money and it's, rebuilding, that there could have been other options to look at versus a developer give back for tax incentives and other things. And I'm standing out and I'm saying it because I still don't agree with the weapon of land use for financial private incentives. I'm just standing.
Okay.
And I do agree that we need to fix the subways. I've never said we're not. We've supported everything that has come before us to fix and change the city the way we operate. But I think this tool is too open for interpretation and too rife for the situation.
Okay. So let me frame it this way. I don't know if we need to weigh in much like a ULURP application where we do a yes, no, yes with conditions, no with conditions, but it sounds like a no and a no with conditions are not in the cards, at least as far as this committee seems to be feeling. Or there are specific conditions to a resolution that we think need to be included, or is this just an enthusiastic yes, while noting in the whereas, as Tammy I think has rightly raised, that as a broader policy consideration, using land use as the tool to achieve these worthy goals is maybe not the best way to do it, and the city should be looking at other means at the same time. Is that a fair way to put it, Tammy?
Well, and I don't understand, Patrick, how you would be supporting this wholeheartedly if in fact you are not supporting the concept of what's being described as basic zoning for dollars, right? I mean, I'm not sure
I think you
how
can
you
support.
propose. Can
I
you?
think, yeah, I think you could support both. You'd say this is we accept that this is a worthy goal. We accept that this is one way to do it, but we would hope that there are additional or better ways to do it. That's how I see that.
I just want to say I totally agree with Tammy. I just, you know, I've been listening to this and I certainly feel that the subways should be more accessible, but it just seems weird. Is there any way we can add that to, you know, that kind of language to the resolution? It just, what Tammy noted, I think it certainly expresses what I think.
Sure.
I have to say, I do think this is Rosa. I do think that this is actually a different situation from the zoning for coastal resiliency. And the reason why is because, as I said before, in our neighborhood, with the density that we have and with the narrowness of the public spaces that we have, and specifically our sidewalks, I don't think that there is any viable solution in most areas in our neighborhood to incorporate vertical accessible options in the public realm, right? And so then you're talking about, you have to have it in the private realm. And the only way that you're going to be able to do that is to incentivize properly, because there is no reason why a developer would necessarily agree to take, you know, months, possibly years of the review process, the risk of that, the interest payments on, you know, on the money they owe for the project, to take that risk, and also to give up land that they could be utilizing for something that actually generates income. I mean, what is the incentive to do that unless there is an exchange of something? And that something doesn't necessarily have to be money, but if you're also asking for the developer to kick in money to actually finance the improvements in entirety, I'm guessing, although, you know, I saw in the zoning text that wasn't absolutely required, then you have to give something back. And whereas the zoning for coastal resiliency, for me, that was a different situation, because basically you're trying to incentivize property owners to do something that's for their own benefit and safety and property protection, through using this, you know, incentive program. But it doesn't, it's sort of, you know, they can take it or leave it, right? I mean, this is something that I do believe is absolutely a necessary public benefit.
I don't
But the
think anyone
question
would
is, can we
argue with that,
tighten up the
Rosa. I mean,
text? I do
just,
believe that the text needs to be tightened up, but I don't think it's like just like a throw it out kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't think I would want to throw it out. I'm not sure I can, you know, we can all fully appreciate the assumption of what's private, what's public, what's incentive, what's not. I mean, I think what we're approving here is that private development is going to pay for public asset of what is, no one is going to argue is a critically needed amenity, which is accessibility in our metro system. You know, we are basically saying that we're going to allow private development to do that, and that's really what's being proposed here. And, you know, I think Tammy's point is one that is, you know, an important one, and evidently something that the board has opined on. So, you know, I'm not sure we can just sort of rule that out of the equation. So I don't know how you want to word this, Patrick, but, you know, I think that there's some important points that have been raised that I think have to be addressed in it in some way. That,
well, I think the way to do that is to point out that, again, you know, we're supportive of the goals of this plan, and in fact support the plan, but request the city find additional tools outside of the zoning toolbox to try to make these things happen, whether it's additional pure public investment or other creative ideas that the public could have input on, but this not be the only one. And I think that's kind of what I heard at the beginning of this presentation, that it's really just an attempt to put one more option out there as a carrot to help achieve these improvements. I do think we can, what I'm saying is I do think we can word that, Alice and Tammy, in a way that we can incorporate those concerns and make prominent mention of that.
Am I allowed to say anything? Or is this?
Sure.
I know the focus has been on the incentives to developers through the zoning bonus provision, but the other component of zoning for accessibility is the easement requirement. And that's not an incentive at all. That's something that the developers are required to work with the MTA to provide, if in fact we need an easement on their property. And that covers the whole city, with the exception of the lowest residential zoning districts. And that I would have to say that easement provision is incredibly impactful and is really an important part of zoning for accessibility.
Well, is it the kind of thing that could be accomplished through legislation or a zoning text amendment all on its own? In other words, does it have to be tied to the bonus program, or is there something about the relation?
It's not tied to the bonus program. It's just part of zoning for accessibility. They're two distinct provisions within this zoning text amendment, but they're actually not related to each other. So I hear some concerns about the zoning bonus provision, but it's the easement certification that is just as important to the MTA, because that is the one where we have seen a number of missed opportunities to secure easements for placing elevators, but we didn't have that ability to get the easements because there was nothing requiring the developers to work with us.
But I think my point is that they're coupled as part of the same package of legislation, right? So
right.
If you,
they're all part of Chapter 6.
It's great to support one and maybe not another. I'm not saying we do or don't, but kind of have to. They're coupled together. That's what we're being presented with. Okay. Go ahead, Al.
Sorry, if I could on that, Patrick. I mean, I don't think that this community board historically has, uncoupled parts of applications and, talked about certain aspects of talked about certain application aspects that they, approve and disapprove of. So, yeah, just wanted to say that.
I gotcha. Vicky, I see your hand is up.
Yes, thank you. Just wanted to ask if it's necessary, and we all know it's necessary, then why can't we call them eminent domain for the locations that are important and required? That's what I would suggest. I think that the bonus program at 20% is really high. I mean, 20% is, given for some of the highest, incentives, and this shouldn't be it. This is for the greater public good. Just call it eminent domain and we'll support it. Thank you.
Eminent domain is an extremely arduous, long and expensive process that we try to avoid at all costs. And I think to cite an elevator is something that I don't think we would normally want to do. We would just, it's just something we really try to avoid.
Well, yeah, it was meant to work for the greater good, and instead it's been politicized and monetized, and so of course it's difficult to do. But when it's for the greater good, that's what it's all about, either an easement or eminent domain. And maybe could you get some support from City Hall, where in this case, it's not such an arduous process, but it's just simply stating it's mandatory for the greater good?
Well, the easement requirement is a mandatory provision.
I know, but I'm just giving you options, just saying, You know, can the city help so you don't have to go through a long eminent domain process that you described? If it's necessary and we need it, then, you know, could we have legislation you can bypass?
There are constitutional considerations around that, Vicky, and it's a legal
yeah.
processes that they have to go through. I don't think they can just legislate around it. I think that's the bigger issue. Plus, I would point out that eminent domain is really a concept about, if you think about it, in the bundle of rights is something that relates to an existing property. Whereas what I think they're trying to accomplish with this legislation is for future projects and going forward to have basically what you're suggesting built into anything that's in the future, which to me does seem like the path of least resistance or something like that. But the extent of
Right,
it,
have a tool. I see what you mean. Yeah, there would be tools in place.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. All right. We are late, so I'm going to call the question on this with the notion that we would approve of the zoning text amendment provisions, both of the provisions, with the caveat of strongly worded encouragement that the city look at other non-zoning ways to achieve these goals. I think I captured that. And Rosa, I think as well, we want to include the very specific points you made about certain pieces of the text where they can tighten it up. I can't say I caught every single one of those or understand them, so we'll work with you separately to make sure that those get into the resolution. I think that's an important thing to note, especially since you did all the hard work on that. So with those items included in the resolution, let's call the question. And I guess we can say all in favor. Well, why don't we do this? Anybody who's opposed, make yourselves known. Okay. Anybody recused or abstaining?
I'm going to abstain, Patrick. That's Alice. I just do need a little more time and information. It's not quite there yet.
Sure. Recording one abstention. Others?
I'm going to abstain.
Gotcha, Joe. Anyone else? Okay. Others will assume are in favor, and measure passes. Committee will be brought to the full board. Okay, that's one down. Next, we're going to talk about the hotel's special permit, also a citywide zoning text amendment. Someone asked a question earlier this week, I forget where, but I heard it, wondering if this is related to the plan we've been hearing about from during the budget season about converting unused hotel spaces to residential. This is a completely different thing in and of itself, and we'll let the city planning team describe this one and what it's all about. So Allison, you want to tee it off and introduce?
Great. Yeah, again, I will introduce. I am joined by my colleague, Matt Petras, who's going to actually be providing the presentation. And again, he is the expert on this, and he'll be leading the Q&A. So with that, I'll be sharing my screen, but Matt will be leading the presentation. So if he could be elevated to presenter, that would be great.
Matt, I just moved you over, so you should be able to do your camera and your unmute.
Great.
And then I will, oh, I'm unable to share my screen. Is that something that you have to enable, Diana?
I just gave you presenter. Let me take it back and pass it back to you. See if that helps.
Oh. No, it didn't work. Could you try one more time? Sorry, I think it might have been a system preferences thing on my end.
All right, one more time. You should get a notification that you're the presenter.
Says I'm the presenter, it just doesn't allow me to share my screen.
Allison, if you need to, you can email it to me and I can pull it up on my end.
Matt, would you like to do that, or do you want to project?
I'm also not able to. Let me see if it's.
Okay, so maybe I'll do an email then.
Matthew, I'm going to pass it to you for a moment if you have it, if you're able to pull it up. That could work.
It's a former NYPD captain. Maybe that's that. So I can say it or
Just a quick reminder for everybody to mute if you're not presenting or speaking.
If that doesn't work for you, Matt, I'm just going to send the presentation to Diana.
Why don't you do that in the meantime, just in case
Okay.
I'm not
Great.
able to get anything going? You'd think after a year of this, we'd all
I know.
have the permissions.
Everything would be all set.
Uh,
Okay, Diana, you should have a presentation in your inbox, hopefully. Thank you, everyone, for bearing with us for the technical difficulties. I know it's late.
I am waiting for the presentation. I haven't received it yet. Matthew, are you having any luck sharing your screen?
no, I'm still grayed out on my end.
Matthew, why don't we, if
Adjourn.
you have the presentation on your screen, if you can just start walking through it, and then Diana and
Yeah,
Allison
let's.
can probably try to work on it in the background. But if you can just give us, get us started, then we can
Sure.
keep moving.
Good
Um,
idea.
so this one's actually pretty simple. It actually might be okay to, if nothing ever comes up, to be able to just talk through it. So this is another text amendment that the city planning or the Department of City Planning is putting forward. It's doing one thing. It would be requiring all new hotels for transient use to have to go through a special permit process to be allowed to be built. So hotels would no longer be allowed to be built as of right. And the reason for that is we've been seeing a growing trend of increased tourism and with that an increased construction of new hotels throughout the city in different parts of the city. And hotels as a use are quasi-commercial, quasi-residential, and they can take many different types of forms. And so we've seen that there's been conflicts with some uses. You might remember the M1 hotel text amendment, which was within light manufacturing districts, we started to see hotels being coming online. A lot more of that was in Brooklyn and Queens. But in these light manufacturing districts where we typically see ground floor or single story like auto body shops or things like that, we would see taller hotels pop up next door to them. And so there's kind of a conflict of uses that was going on. And so that was an example of where we've been seeing hotels conflict with the surrounding neighborhood. Before that, if you were here, if you're on the community board in 2010, you might recall the Tribeca Mixed Use District. There's been a whole host of hotel special permits that have been implemented throughout the city. The Tribeca Mixed Use District was really regulating those hotels that were over 100 rooms. So it was saying that large hotels may be inappropriate in the area. So that's something where additional discretionary review would be required. We have different types of hotels in East Harlem and in Inwood, where those are tied to residential development goals, where the city wants to see more residential units come online before it sees hotel rooms. And so there's kind of just a bunch of different hotel special permits, and the way we've been regulating them has kind of been on an ad hoc basis. And so this proposal is really to have a more comprehensive approach to that specific type of use. So anywhere, oh, great. So I think if we jump to slide 4, that should be about where I was at.
Sorry, I'm trying to get full screen here.
Great. Great. Let's go to the next slide. Great. And so this is kind of what I was just mentioning. So we have existing special purpose districts that are regulating hotels throughout the city. The M1 districts were what I talked about. Those are in pink. The Tribeca mixed use district is a kind of an essential character finding. You can see that in the orangish color. And then harmonious development. So Battery Park City has its own zoning rules, as you're all familiar with, and one of those is regulating hotels. We can go to the next slide. Yep. And so these are locations of hotels, and so we're now just trying to create a consistent zoning framework for hotels throughout the city, as opposed to having all of these different types of regulations regulating this one specific use. Next slide. So I'll go through this pretty quickly, but these are just examples where we've seen conflicts of uses. Starting in the upper left in the C8 district, we see there's a hotel. In the background here, it's next to industrial uses and manufacturing and some smaller warehouses there. And across the street's a cemetery. And so this might be an area where if this proposal were to be approved, the City Planning Commission, along with the Community Board, would look at this use and see, is it in conflict with its surrounding uses? And in this case, we may say yes, because it doesn't look like this is really in context with what the surrounding uses are. To the right, this is another hotel in Queens. The hotel itself is not necessarily an inappropriate use here, but you can see that there's a curb cut, which is basically the entire sidewalk length. And so there's going to be a conflict here between the parking that's allowed as of right and also required in this neighborhood and the pedestrians that are walking on the sidewalk. So this is another area where the site may be reconfigured to then say, well, let's try to reduce this conflict between pedestrians and vehicles. We may be more familiar in the C62 district at the bottom left, where hotels are typically pushed back from the street wall and kind of break up that facade that we typically see in a lot of lower Manhattan and throughout Midtown and even further north. The C43A district, this is also in Queens. This hotel is right next to the beach, so it actually is an appropriate location for a hotel, except that it kind of squeezes the sidewalk. And so where we would expect to see a lot of folks walking from the street down to the beach, they may actually get pushed into the street because the narrowness of the sidewalk there and how the hotel is kind of pushed right up against the street line may be something that presents a conflict. Next slide. And so this is really just showing where the applicability is. So it's going to be everywhere that hotels are currently allowed as of right. So where they're currently allowed as of right are in the pink. And the area that is in pink, that's where you would need to apply for a hotel special permit if you were to construct one in the future. The areas in gray are just going to have their rules pretty much replaced with this new finding, but they already have an existing hotel special permit in place. It's just their findings are a little bit different for each of them. And so this is going to create that consistent framework. So really the way to think about this slide is anywhere you see any other color but white, that's where a hotel special permit would need to be sought. Everywhere in white, hotels are not currently allowed as of right because these are residential districts. Next slide. Great. So yeah, we're just zooming in now to Community District 1. We can see that almost all of the district would have applicability here. So like I mentioned before, the Tribeca Mixed Use District already has rules. Those would just be kind of wrapped into the citywide hotel special permit. Battery Park City really only allows hotels on one site. The rest are governed by either a large scale or the use is prohibited. And the areas in white that you're seeing are either Mapped Park or Southbridge Towers, which is a R8 district where hotels are not allowed. Next slide. Great. So like M1, these rules are only for hotels that are serving a commercial purpose. They're not intended to regulate or change any of the uses associated with, or any of the regulations associated with public purpose hotels, which are temporary housing for the homeless. So this is a city mandate. The city is required to put in emergency shelters where it needs to, and this proposal is remaining neutral on that. I understand there's issues and concerns about the siting of homeless facilities. Those are going to continue to be subject to site selection criteria. And so this proposal is not really touching any of those rules, and it's not proposing any additional rules relating to homeless shelters or temporary housing. Next slide, please. Great. I think I'm just gonna skip this one. This is kind of the slide I talked about before, where the use of this hotel may be reconfigured to under the special permit. We can definitely go back to this if you want to really talk through an example. So next slide, please. All right. So now on to COVID. And so we've had some questions. Well, why are you doing this now? There's been a lot of the hotel tourism industry has been particularly hard hit by the pandemic. So this proposal is not born out of the pandemic. These have been discussions that have been happening for years. It just kind of now is the culmination of all of those discussions. We do anticipate that in the future, New York City is going to come back, tourism is going to come back, and so we are proceeding with this proposal at this time because we know that once these regulations are in place, the future development of hotels can then move forward in a more consistent way. But related to the pandemic recovery, there are a series of different vesting rules because we don't want to overburden that industry. And so we see here that there's a lot of hotel closures that have happened. Most of those, almost all of them have been in Manhattan, and there has been a significant loss of jobs here. And so on the next slide, if we can go to the next slide. Yeah, perfect. These are we have recovery provisions that are part of this proposal. And so there's modified vesting rules. So the vesting rules are related to projects that are in DOB's pipeline. So those can continue. Any project that has filed with DOB prior to 2018 would need to obtain a foundation permit prior to adoption to move forward. This is, of course, just for projects that have a hotel component. And so projects filed between January 1st, 2018 and referral would need to obtain a zoning plan approval from DOB prior to adoption. And so both of these buildings that fall into either of these categories would then have 6 years. Typically, we require 2 years from date of to complete construction, but we're now saying 6 years from the date of adoption to the end of construction. So extending that time period just a little bit more. For projects that are in BSA or the City Planning Commission's pipeline, those ones would not require a special permit if approved after January 1st, 2018. For applications that begin public review or file with BSA prior to the date of adoption, which is going to be in November, those will also not require a special permit. So if a project were to certify in October and we're anticipating an adoption in November, they can proceed without the special permit. If there is a hotel component in a project that certifies after the date of adoption, then they would need to include this special permit as part of their suite of actions. And the extended discontinuance is related to hotels that existed on the date of adoption. If they are to become vacant, they can retain that use for 6 years. So typically we have a 2-year period of discontinuance before it has to revert to the as of right use. We're extending that to 6 years to allow for that recovery. Next slide. Right. So as part of the proposal, we did complete an environmental impact statement, which was issued on May 3rd. It did identify significant adverse impacts with respect to hotel and tourism. There are no other significant adverse impacts identified, and we're currently considering ways to mitigate measures that to mitigate that significant adverse impact to the hotel and tourism industry, but those are currently still being explored. So next slide, please. Okay, so all that kind of just leads to this text. The text affects a lot of the zoning resolution, just because there's a lot of places where we really mention the word hotel and special uses for it. But this is kind of the crux of it. So the finding is the commission shall find that such hotel use will not impair the future use or development of the surrounding area. This is almost verbatim what the Tribeca mixed use hotel special permit says. And this is really intentionally has a broader scope because we can't create rules for throughout the city where hotels are going to be appropriate, because what might be appropriate in Community District 1 in Manhattan is going to be different than what's appropriate in Astoria or what's appropriate out in the Rockaways. And so this is really saying that the commission needs to look at, are these uses appropriate for the immediately adjacent neighborhood character? And I believe this is the last slide I have. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take those.
Okay, so committee members, raise your hand if you have questions. I'll start us off. I have two. One is I don't understand the fundamental process of how the permit gets issued. Can you just quickly walk through that? So an applicant applies, then
Yep. Yeah, so you may be more familiar with special permits for bulk, where applicants come in and they're seeking maybe a larger building or maybe going into the sky exposure plane. So this is a special permit for the use. So it's really just they would go through the same ULURP process. They would come to the Department of City Planning. We would ensure that the application's ready for you to review and for the City Planning Commission to review. It would then be referred into full ULURP. So it would take the full ULURP clock, 60 days to you, and then go to the borough president, then to City Planning Commission, and then council. And if there's approvals at the City Planning Commission and at council, then it would be then that use would be then be allowed to be built on that site.
And so that's for the development of any new building that would be used as a hotel. That means every single new hotel building in our community district would come through us for an application. What about conversions?
Which way?
Conversions from whatever it is to a hotel.
Yes, those would need special permits as well. It would even be if there's a residential building and 2 units were to be wanted, the landowner would want to convert 2 of those units to use group 5 hotel. Those would need to then go through the ULURP process.
Okay, and then I guess just more fundamentally, why are we doing this? Why now?
Sure. So I think the first question, I'm going to separate it into 2. Why are we doing this? This has been something that has come up in a lot of discussions with community boards, community organizations, with elected officials about the appropriateness of hotels. I want to be very clear that this is not saying that hotels are inappropriate. This is saying that we need to assess whether or not they are appropriate. So that additional special permit is not a ban on hotels. It just says we need to make sure that it goes through the proper channels to get approval. The why now is, I kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier. While we have been talking about it, and perhaps after the tourism industry has kind of been hurt a lot by the pandemic, this doesn't make sense to then have an additional regulatory hurdle. But that's why we're providing those different recovery provisions that do allow for existing hotels to come back within 6 years. That does allow new hotels to be built if they've already had plans to be built at the Department of Buildings, or if they have plans to be built and they certify before that date of adoption with city planning or with the BSA.
I mean, I guess I'm struggling with the basic rationale here in the first place when the environmental impact statement identified a significant adverse impact to hotel and tourism, which seems to me like an industry we don't exactly want to kick while they're down. So I guess I'd like to hear from other committee members. And I see Tammy and then Vicky have their hands up, but this sort of strikes me as a solution in search of a problem. Tammy?
Thanks, Patrick. Since you mentioned that, even where does Airbnb sit in terms of the city's purview of that, and where do corporate housing sit in terms of purview in this? Are they at all related? Is there a classification change for those that's applicable or related to this?
So use group 5 is transient hotels. So that's anything less than 30 days. Hotels, motels, hotels, which are not hotels on boats, but hotels that you get to by boat. So those are the things that are regulated. This is not regulating Airbnb. Those are subject to separate regulations. If they fall under use group 5, then that's something where this would regulate that. And I believe corporate housing, corporate hotels and corporate housing are kind of going to fall into the same boat. Sometimes those are use group 5 hotels, just if they are not necessarily residences that are owned by the business, but if they're ones that are through a separate company that's then basically operating as a hotel, but doing so, and their clients are more corporate. So that's something that would be regulated by this.
Thank you.
Vicky?
While I understand that the hotel industry's been hit hard, I just wanted to say, where have you been so far? In the last 10 years, I mean, I totally support this. In the last 10 years, the quantity of hotels built in New York City was over, what, 200-300? And single-handedly, they have wiped out entire districts, like the Flower District is completely wiped out, right? And I am fully in support of this limitation because it has created enormous overcrowding, taken out some of the wonderful things that we had, the entire jewelry district other than 47th Street was sort of obliterated. As I said, the flower market, they're everywhere. So thank you for proposing this.
Okay, anybody else have questions? Sorry if I missed it, but can you let us know what time track this is on?
Yes, I believe we're actually technically ULURP clock for you, or your referral period. So this will be, we're asking for responses by July 12th. So I believe the official referral package will be sent either tomorrow or on Wednesday.
Okay.
Patrick, can I ask Allison Brown a question?
Please do.
So the city charter says that community board would get 30 days additional notice, hence the notification. But the notification is also supposed to include all the materials to be able to opine and share. In this case, I see two things that come to mind as opposite in terms of discussion and conversation from the same thing. We got the notification for this particular one, and we have the 30 days extra that a community board should be able to have within a longer time period, which gives us the time to talk about it, share materials when they come in, and then vote. Why weren't we afforded the same opportunity with the last topic? And it's just really more of a timing question, because my understanding of the city charter was that with the notice comes the information.
Sure. So the notice is a 30-day notice The noticing is for the noticing requirement, 30-day requirement, is for ULURP projects. So that's one thing. This is not technically ULURP, though we are following a traditional ULURP calendar, for the community board so that they can fit this into their regular review. But a sole just text amendment application is actually not ULURP. The other thing is that I think the additional 30 days that you're talking about, there was a recent, there was a vote about community boards getting an additional 30 days to review things over the summer. That's only when projects are referred out in June or July, so that referral doesn't conflict with the community board's break in either July or August. So since this project was reviewed by the commission or certified by the commission and referred a week ago, that would not apply, so it's only May.
Gotcha.
And then finally, ZFA actually was referred out several weeks ago in April, and it was the choice of the committee scheduled the presentation from our team in May. So I don't really know how much more to say about that.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, anybody else? So I guess I would propose, but I want to hear from the rest of the committee, that we come back to this for resolution if people want to have a little time to think about it. But I could be convinced that people want to do a resolution now, I guess. I don't know. I know we've got a fairly busy couple of months coming up. 250 Water will likely be before us, I think, next month. So
I just wanted to note, Patrick, because this is a citywide text amendment and Matt is incredibly strained going to every single Manhattan community board.
Yeah.
And the rest of our team as well going out to the rest of the city. We wouldn't be able to come back and present another time. Happy to answer questions over email if they arise, but I just wanted to note that if you're considering putting this off.
Fair point. Thanks for that. Tammy, is your hand still up, or did you? No, you're good. Okay. All right. So why don't we bring it up in a resolution? I think we can do it fairly quickly next month, even though I know we have other stuff going on. I think I, for one, would kind of want to think about this a little bit. I'm still struggling with the rationale behind it. But if other members of the committee think we should move on it right now, please speak up. Otherwise, we'll table it over to next month.
Well, I'm obviously good with asking for a resolution now and maybe a preliminary vote. See, feel out what other people think.
Okay. I'm fine with that. So can folks unmute and kind of yay or nay?
Fine with that too, Jason.
Paul, yes, let's vote now.
Okay.
Mike Kettering here. I would vote for holding this over.
Anybody else? All right. Sounds like to me, it sounds like the sense of the committee is to go forward on it right now. So I didn't hear a lot of question or discussion around what we might want to caveat within a resolution. So it sounds to me as though this is a straight up yes or no. So with that, let's call the question. All those in favor of approving or voting yes on that zoning text amendment? Okay, let me do it this way. Anybody opposed to it? I'll register I'm opposed.
I'm opposed as well, Kettering.
Anybody else? Any recusals or abstentions?
Blank abstains.
Brown
Rosa
Kennedy
Chang
abstains.
abstains.
There were two at once.
Did you
Sorry,
get that? It
Rosa
was Brown
Chang.
Kennedy abstains.
I
And
actually got
Rosa
both.
Chang
Okay,
abstaining.
great.
Megan and Rose, I got them both.
It's Megan, Rosa, and Alice abstaining, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And me and Michael Kettering opposed. Okay, anybody else? Otherwise, you will be assumed to be in favor. All right, and that then passes. Okay. So that brings us, thanks, Allison. Thanks, DCP team. We appreciate your time. More than welcome to hang on for the last item if you like. I know it.
No.
It's late. I get it.
Thank you so much, Community Board 1. We'll see you soon, I'm sure.
Bye, thanks.
Allison.
Okay, the very last item is for us to come to a resolution on the Planning Together legislation. This is Intro 2186, sponsored by Speaker Johnson and other council members. We've talked about this for a couple of months and have had at least one presentation. We know we have real concerns about how this mechanism would really work, whether it adds an unnecessary layer of bureaucracy, whether it really usurps the role of the community board and in fact has the impact of lessening community voice and community involvement. A lot of concerns that quite frankly were laid out in Tammy's letter, which was authored quickly to put our placeholder down before a city council hearing, but has proved to be extremely good in sort of setting out the concerns. And we heard at that committee hearing a lot of others echoing those concerns. So I think, at least, that we would adopt a resolution that looks very much like this. And I see Diana has it up on the screen. I think it's a really good letter, and it's a very succinct presentation of the concerns that we have. So, if folks have anything else that they want to add to this that they think we need to include in our resolution, it sounds from the sense I've gotten from the questions and comments that have come in over the several presentations is that the committee does not favor the legislation in its current form, has real concerns, and wants to see it not passed in favor of either further study or coming to grips with the many problems that people have identified. So with that, please feel free to unmute and just jump in if you have additional concerns and things that you want to throw into the pot for our resolution.
I'd like to see, just to make sure this point that's a little bit, a little unclear is, CB1 is not opposed to the concept of long-term comprehensive planning. I mean, are we saying, that we are in favor of some sort of comprehensive plan, but its success is, determinant on this community-based aspect? Because I think that's important, particularly as resiliency planning is concerned, that we do have some sort of, push towards something that's comprehensive and looks at the whole 5 boroughs and such. So I don't know where the committee or the board stands on that, but that's a little unclear in that last paragraph. I'd like to be a little more pro, but with an understanding that it needs all these other aspects that are noted here.
Right, so pro comprehensive planning, little c, little p, as opposed to comprehensive planning, this legislation, right?
Yeah, I guess that's a fair way to say it.
Right. Yeah, I think we can definitely draw that out. Anybody else? Or you all just had it? Okay, not hearing any other comments. Let's call the question on this resolution. We'll assume you're in favor unless you speak up now and say that you are opposed. Anybody recused or abstained? Chatty group. All right. That's awesome. Thanks, guys. This is also passed much in the form of the letter we just saw with Alice's helpful comment. We'll flesh that out a little bit. And of course, you'll see all the draft resolutions ahead of the full board meeting. From our agenda with that, that's it. It's been a long night, so thanks everybody for hanging in there.
Thank you, Patrick. Great job. Thanks a lot. Diana, too.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Good night, everybody.
Night.